The gavel was seconds from falling when a voice cut through the Manhattan federal courtroom like a blade through silk. Your Honor, I'll be representing Ms. Hartwell. Every head turned toward the maintenance closet. A man in coveralls stepped forward, mop bucket rattling behind him. The prosecutor laughed. The judge frowned. Billionaire Lena Hartwell looked up from her empty defense table, confused and desperate. Then Graham Keaton reached into his worn jacket and produced something no one expected, a valid bar card. The courtroom fell silent. This wasn't a joke. This was about to become the trial that would crack open the most dangerous conspiracy in corporate America, and it started with a janitor who'd been invisible for 15 years. If you want to see how an invisible man takes down an empire, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of the Southern District Federal Courthouse cast harsh shadows across the marble floor, and Graham Keaton pushed his maintenance cart with the same steady rhythm he'd maintained for 13 months. Squeak, roll, squeak, roll. The pattern was meditation. The pattern was safety. The pattern kept him beneath notice, which was exactly where he needed to be. He'd learned that being invisible was its own kind of power. It was 7:30 in the morning, an hour before the building opened to the public, and Graham moved through the empty hallways with practiced efficiency. He knew every courtroom, every judge's chamber, every corner where conversations echoed just a little too clearly. He knew which lawyers tipped, which ones didn't see him at all, and which ones, very rarely, still recognized something in his eyes that didn't quite match the coveralls. Most days that suited him fine. He was wiping down the brass railings outside courtroom 18B when he heard the commotion. Voices sharp with panic, footsteps moving fast. Graham glanced up just long enough to see three men in expensive suits rushing past, phones pressed to their ears, faces pale. Behind them, a woman walked alone. She moved differently than they did, where they scattered like startled birds. She walked with the kind of control that came from refusing to show fear in public. Tall, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back in a style that was professional without trying to be. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Graham made in 6 months, but it was the way she carried herself that caught his attention. She looked like someone who'd already decided she wasn't going to beg. Graham knew that look. He'd worn it himself once, a lifetime ago. The woman, Lena Hartwell, according to the case schedule he'd seen posted outside the courtroom, paused at the entrance to 18B. Her hand rested briefly on the door handle, and Graham saw her shoulders rise and fall with one long, controlled breath. Then she pushed through. He shouldn't have followed, but something about the panic in those lawyers' faces, the isolation in hers, pulled at an instinct Graham thought he'd buried. He left his cart against the wall and moved quietly to the courtroom door, slipping inside just as the gallery lights came up. The space was already filling. Press in the back rows, corporate observers along the sides, a prosecution team that looked like they'd dressed for a victory parade. At the defense table, Lena Hartwell sat alone, her expensive leather briefcase open in front of her, files spread across the surface in what Graham recognized as organized desperation. "All rise," the bailiff's voice cracked through the room. Judge Marion Fisk entered from chambers, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for sufferance. She took the bench with the kind of efficiency that said she'd already read every filing and wasn't in the mood for theatrics. "Be seated." Judge Fisk settled her reading glasses on her nose and looked directly at the defense table. Her expression shifted, just slightly, from stern to concerned. "Ms. Hartwell, where's your legal team?" Lena stood. Her voice was steady, but Graham could hear the threat of something raw beneath it. "Your Honor, as of approximately 45 minutes ago, my attorneys have withdrawn from the case citing irreconcilable strategic differences." A murmur rolled through the gallery. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Dale Cortman, didn't bother hiding his smile. 45 minutes before trial," Judge Fisk repeated, her tone flat. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm sympathetic to your situation, but this court has a schedule to maintain. The government has 18 witnesses ready to testify, and we have a jury pool waiting downstairs. Do you have replacement counsel?" "I'm working on it, Your Honor. If I could request a continuance." "Motion to proceed," Cortman interrupted, standing with the kind of theatrical timing that came from too many years playing to cameras. Your Honor, the defense has had 9 months to prepare. Ms. Hartwell has burned through 4 legal teams in that time. This is a delay tactic, and the government respectfully asks the court to move forward. If Ms. Hartwell cannot secure representation, the court should enter a default judgment. The murmur grew louder. Lena's hands tightened on the edge of the table, knuckles going white, but her expression didn't change. Graham watched her and saw something he recognized, the moment right before you decide whether to fight or let the system bury you. Judge Fisk removed her glasses. Ms. Hartwell, Mr. Courtman raises a valid point. You've had ample opportunity to secure counsel. I cannot continue to delay these proceedings because, Your Honor, the voice came from the back of the courtroom. Graham's voice, though it sounded strange to his own ears, louder than he'd spoken in years, clearer. Every head turned. Graham stood slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes landing on him for the first time in a very long time. He was acutely aware of the coveralls, the name patch that read G. Keaton in faded script, the smell of industrial cleaner that probably clung to his clothes. He was aware of the mop bucket he'd left in the hallway, the cart full of supplies, the entire architecture of invisibility he'd built around himself. He stepped forward anyway. Your Honor, I'll be representing Ms. Hartwell. The laughter started immediately. Not from everyone, Judge Fisk didn't laugh, and neither did Lena Hartwell, but from enough of the gallery that it rolled through the room like a wave. Courtman actually grinned, glancing at his associates as if to confirm they were all seeing the same absurd thing. Sir, Judge Fisk said, her voice carrying the patience of someone who dealt with pro se litigants and courthouse eccentrics for 3 decades. This is a federal courtroom. If you're interested in observing, you're welcome to take a seat in the gallery, but Graham reached into the inner pocket of his coveralls. His fingers found the worn leather case he'd carried every day for 15 years, even when he had no intention of ever opening it in public. He pulled it out and walked down the center aisle, each step echoing in the suddenly quiet room. He reached the bar, opened the case, and held up the card inside. Graham Michael Keaton, he said clearly, New York State Bar, admitted 2007. Still active. The laughter died. Judge Fisk leaned forward, squinting at the card. Graham stepped closer and handed it up to the bailiff, who examined it carefully before passing it to the bench. The judge studied it for a long moment, then looked at Graham with new eyes. Keaton, she said slowly, you're dressed like maintenance staff. I am maintenance staff, Your Honor. I work nights here, but I'm also a licensed attorney and Ms. Hartwell needs representation. I'm offering to provide it. Courtman was on his feet. Your Honor, this is absurd. We don't even know if this man has malpractice insurance. If he's prepared for a case of this magnitude, I'm standing right here, Graham said, not looking at Courtman. You can address your concerns to me directly. Fine. Courtman turned and Graham saw the calculation in his eyes, the prosecutor sizing up what he thought would be easy prey. When was the last time you tried a federal case, Mr. Keaton? 15 years ago. 15 years. Courtman's smile returned. And in that time, you've been working as a janitor. Maintenance technician, Graham corrected mildly. And yes, Your Honor, the government objects to this arrangement. Ms. Hartwell deserves competent counsel, and frankly, so does the integrity of this trial. A man who hasn't practiced in over a decade cannot possibly— Can you prove I'm incompetent? Graham asked. His voice was quiet, but something in it made Courtman pause. Because unless you can demonstrate actual incompetence, Ms. Hartwell has the right to counsel of her choosing. That's not just case law, Mr. Courtman. That's the Sixth Amendment. Judge Fisk was watching Graham now with undisguised curiosity. Mr. Keaton, I'm inclined to allow this, but I need to hear from your client. Ms. Hartwell, do you wish to be represented by Mr. Keaton? Lena had been staring at Graham since he'd first spoken. Now she stood, and Graham saw her trying to read him, trying to figure out if this was real or some kind of elaborate humiliation. I don't know you, she said carefully. No, ma'am. I don't know why you're doing this. Because someone needs to, Graham said simply. And because I think you're being set up. Something shifted in Lena's expression. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. Like she'd heard something in his words that matched what she'd been thinking alone in the dark for months. Yes, she said to the judge, I want Mr. Keaton to represent me. The courtroom exploded into noise, reporters scrambling for phones, observers shouting questions, courtmen arguing loudly about procedure and precedent. Judge Fisk let it run for exactly 10 seconds before slamming her gavel down hard enough to crack like thunder. "Order! We will have order!" She fixed Graham with a look that was equal parts skepticism and something that might have been respect. "Mr. Keaton, I'm going to allow this, but understand, I will not tolerate delays. I will not tolerate unprofessional conduct, and I will not hesitate to remove you if you prove unable to meet the standards of this court. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor." "Then approach and confer with your client. We'll resume in 30 minutes. The gavel came down again. Recess. The moment the judge left the bench, Graham moved to the defense table. Lena was already gathering files, her movements sharp and controlled, but he could see the tremor in her hands. "Conference room," she said without looking at him. "Now." They found an empty room 2 doors down, barely more than a closet with a table and 4 chairs. The moment the door closed, Lena rounded on him. "Who are you really?" "I told you, Graham Keaton, licensed attorney. Why are you working as a janitor if you're a lawyer?" Graham pulled out a chair and sat, mostly because his legs were shaking and he didn't want her to see. 15 years of invisibility, shattered in 30 seconds. The adrenaline was hitting him now, cold and electric. "Long story," he said. "Short version. I made an enemy, got framed for something I didn't do, spent 2 years fighting to keep my license and lost everything else in the process. When it was over, I was broke, blacklisted, and nobody would hire me. So I took the first job I could get and stayed invisible." Lena sat down across from him. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent, calculating, searched his face. "Why help me?" "Because I watched 3 terrified lawyers run out of here this morning, and I know what that means. Someone got to them. Someone with enough power to make them abandon a client hours before trial." Graham leaned forward. "I've seen this before, Ms. Hartwell. This isn't just a patent case. This is a hit job." For the first time since he'd seen her, Lena's control cracked. She looked down at her hands, and Graham saw the exhaustion underneath the armor. "Everyone thinks I'm paranoid," she said quietly. "My lawyers kept telling me it was just aggressive litigation, that Crawford Technologies is just protecting their market position. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels coordinated," Graham finished, "timed, like someone's pulling strings you can't see." Lena looked up sharply. "Yes, exactly that." Graham nodded. He'd felt that before too, in his own case. The sense that the machine moving against you was too smooth, too synchronized to be anything but orchestrated. He'd never been able to prove it. But maybe this time he could. "Tell me about the case," he said. "Fast. I need everything." Lena opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick accordion file. "Crawford Technologies claims I stole their quantum encryption algorithm. They're suing for patent infringement, theft of trade secrets, and corporate espionage. The government brought criminal charges 6 months ago." She spread documents across the table, patent filings, technical schematics, email chains. "They say I couldn't have developed the breakthrough without stealing their research." "Could you?" "I didn't need to steal anything." Lena's voice hardened. "I built this technology 7 years ago. I have notebooks, prototypes, test results, all dated and notarized. Crawford Technologies didn't even exist until 5 years ago." Graham picked up one of the patent filings. Crawford Tech's application was dated 3 years ago, but the technology described was sophisticated, years of research compressed into a single filing. "If you built it first, why didn't you file for protection?" "I did, 2 years before they did." Lena pulled out another document, a patent application with a filing date that predated Crawford's by 26 months. "But my application got tangled in administrative review. It sat in limbo for 3 years while Crawford sailed through approval in 8 months. That was red flag number 1. Graham had handled enough IP cases to know that patent office timing wasn't random. It could be influenced, delayed, accelerated by people who knew which bureaucratic levers to pull. Who owns Crawford Technologies? That's where it gets complicated. Lena pulled out a corporate structure chart that looked like a spider web. Shell companies, holding corporations, LLCs registered in Delaware and the Caymans. The public face is Richard Crawford, silver-haired CEO who plays up the self-made tech genius angle. But I don't think he's really in charge. Who is? I don't know, but I think Lena hesitated, then pulled out one more document. A blurry photograph of a man in his 60s, gray suit, no smile. I've seen this man twice. Once at a tech conference where Crawford announced their first product. Once outside my office building the day before my lawyers first tried to quit. He doesn't talk to anyone, he just watches. Graham studied the photo. The man's face was unremarkable, but his posture wasn't. Military bearing, alert eyes, the stance of someone used to command. You get a name? No, but I sent the photo to a private investigator. He called me back 3 days later and said he couldn't help me. Wouldn't say why. Red flag number 2. Graham added it to the list forming in his head. What about your legal team? All 4 firms, why did they really quit? Lena's jaw tightened. The first one said they had a conflict of interest they'd overlooked. The second claimed I wasn't cooperating with their strategy. The third just sent a withdrawal letter with no explanation. And this morning, she gestured toward the courtroom. Marcus, the lead attorney, called me at 6:45. Said he'd received a credible threat against his family. Said he was sorry, but he couldn't take the risk. He reported to the police? He said there was no point, that the threat didn't come with evidence, just information. Details about his daughter's school schedule, his wife's jogging route. Things that prove someone was watching. Graham sat back. The pattern was clear now, sharp as broken glass. This wasn't litigation. This was warfare. Ms. Hartwell. Lena, she said. If you're going to defend me, call me Lena. Lena, Graham corrected. I need you to understand something. If I take this case, I'm going to dig. I'm going to ask questions that make people uncomfortable. I'm going to look for connections that someone clearly doesn't want found. And when I do that, the same people who came after your lawyers are probably going to come after me. Then why do it? Because I'm already at the bottom, Graham said simply. I've got nothing left to lose except maybe my daughter's respect. And I lost most of that a long time ago. But you? You've got a company, a reputation, and apparently a piece of technology that someone wants badly enough to destroy your life over. That makes this worth fighting. Lena studied him for a long moment. You really think we can win? I think we can fight. That's all I can promise. She nodded slowly, then started gathering the files back into organized stacks. What do you need from me? First, access to everything. Every file, every employee, every piece of correspondence related to Crawford or Saltposh or the technology. Second, I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing, even when it doesn't look like it. And third, Graham pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. I need to make a call. To who? The only person I trust to help us figure out who's really behind this. He dialed. It rang 3 times before a young woman's voice answered, cautious and surprised. Dad? Hey, Tessa, I know it's early, but I need a favor. It's 7 in the morning on a Wednesday. Since when do you need favors at 7 in the morning? Graham glanced at Lena, who was watching him with open curiosity. Since I just took a case against some very powerful people, and I need someone who knows how to follow money through shell corporations and find patterns nobody wants found. There was a pause, then, you took a case? Like an actual legal case? I'm defending someone in federal court. Trial starts in 20 minutes. Holy Dad, what is happening? I'll explain later. Can you help or not? Another pause, longer this time. Graham could almost hear Tessa thinking, weighing whether this was real or another false start. His daughter had watched him disappear into maintenance work for too many years. She'd stopped asking when he'd practice law again. Yeah, Tessa said finally. Yeah, I can help. What do you need? Everything you can find on Crawford Technologies. Ownership structure, board members, major investors, anything that connects them to other corporations or wealthy individuals. And one more thing. Graham described the man in the photograph. See if you can identify him. Gray suit, military bearing, early 60s, private investigator wouldn't touch him. That's not ominous at all, Tessa said dryly. Okay, give me a few hours. You're the best. I know, don't get yourself killed, old man. The line went dead. Graham pocketed his phone and found Lena smiling, just slightly, for the first time since he'd seen her. Your daughter sounds capable, she said. She's brilliant. Graduated top of her class in forensic accounting, works for a nonprofit tracking corruption. If anyone can find the connections, it's her. Does she know you're working as a janitor? She knows. Graham stood and started helping Lena pack up the files. She's not thrilled about it, but she understands. Some battles you can't win. You just survive them and try to build something smaller on the other side. Is that what you did? Built something smaller? Graham thought about the question, about his apartment with its leaky faucet and secondhand furniture, about pushing a maintenance cart through empty hallways, about all the ways he'd made himself invisible because being seen hurt too much. No, he said honestly, I just survived. But maybe that's about to change. They gathered everything and headed back to the courtroom. As they walked, Graham felt the weight of what he'd just done settling over him like snow, quiet and cold and inevitable. He'd stepped out of the shadows. He'd painted a target on his back. And he'd promised a stranger that he could fight a battle he didn't fully understand against an enemy he couldn't clearly see. But he'd also felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years, the clarity of purpose that came from standing up when everyone else sat down. The courtroom was packed when they returned. Judge Fisk took the bench exactly 30 minutes after she'd called recess, and Graham saw approval flash in her eyes when she noted he was ready. Mr. Keaton, are you prepared to proceed? Graham stood. His coveralls felt strange now, both armor and handicap. But he stood straight, shoulders back, and met the judge's eyes with the confidence of a man who'd once been very good at this work. Yes, Your Honor, the defense is ready. Then let's begin. Mr. Courtman, call your first witness. The trial started like a machine coming to life, smooth, methodical, designed to overwhelm. Courtman called a parade of technical experts, each one building on the last to construct a narrative that was simple and damning. Lena Hartwell couldn't have developed the quantum encryption algorithm without access to Crawford Technologies' proprietary research. The timeline was impossible. The similarity was too precise. The only explanation was theft. Graham listened and took notes in the leather notebook he'd bought 15 years ago and barely used since. He watched the jury, 8 faces trying to follow testimony that was deliberately complex, and he watched Lena, who sat rigid beside him, her expression carefully neutral, even as the government built a case that painted her as a criminal. By the end of day 1, the press was calling it the Janitor's trial. Social media lit up with memes and hot takes. Graham's face, captured in a dozen unauthorized photos, circulated with captions that ranged from mockery to cautious admiration. The consensus seemed to be that he was either a lunatic or the most interesting thing to happen in federal court in years. When they finally adjourned, Graham and Lena gathered their materials in silence. The courtroom emptied around them until it was just the two of them and the security guard waiting to lock up. "You did good today," Lena said quietly. Graham shook his head. "I listened, that's all. Tomorrow's when it gets harder." "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, I start asking questions, and we find out who gets nervous when I do." They walked out together into the Manhattan evening, and Graham felt the city around him like a living thing. Millions of people, thousands of stories, and somewhere in all that noise, someone watching to make sure Lena Hartwell went down and stayed down. But they'd have to go through him first. And Graham Keaton, invisible maintenance worker, disgraced lawyer, man with nothing left to lose, was done being easy to push around. The real fight was about to begin. Graham's apartment was exactly what 15 years of careful invisibility looked like. A 4th-floor walk-up in Queens with water stains on the ceiling, furniture from 3 different decades, and windows that overlooked a bodega that never seemed to close. He'd lived there for 11 years, and the landlord still occasionally forgot his name. It was 9:30 when he finally made it home, arms heavy with file boxes Lena had insisted he take. The case documents filled his kitchen table, spilled onto the counter, covered every available surface until his small apartment looked like a law office had exploded inside it. Graham made instant coffee and sat down to read, knowing he wouldn't sleep anyway. His phone buzzed at 10:15. Tessa's name lit the screen. "Tell me you're not actually doing this," she said instead of hello. "Doing what?" "Defending a billionaire accused of corporate espionage in federal court while working as a janitor. Tell me the internet is lying." Graham rubbed his eyes. "The internet is mostly accurate, actually." "Dad? Tessa's voice carried the particular exhaustion of a daughter who'd spent too many years watching her father retreat from the world. What are you thinking? I'm thinking someone's getting away with something, and I might be able to stop it. Or you might get yourself hurt. Again. A pause. I did the preliminary search you asked for. Crawford Technologies is a maze. 7 layers of shell companies, LLCs registered in 3 different countries, and at least 4 holding corporations that exist only on paper. Whoever structured this knew exactly how to hide ownership. Graham pulled over a legal pad. What did you find? The public CEO is Richard Crawford, but he only owns 8% of the company. The rest is divided between anonymous investors and something called Sentinel Holdings Group, which is itself owned by another shell company called Meridian Capital Partners, which is owned by, you get the idea, it's turtles all the way down. But there's a pattern? There's always a pattern. Tessa's voice shifted into the focused tone she used when talking about her work. I cross-referenced the board members, traced their previous affiliations, and found something interesting. 3 of Crawford's senior executives used to work for a defense contractor called Axion Defense Systems. Another 2 came from an energy company called Tidewater Energy Group. Both companies are privately held, both have connections to the same venture capital firm, and both have been involved in litigation over proprietary technology. Graham wrote faster. What kind of litigation? The kind where smaller companies get crushed, patent disputes, trade secret claims, corporate espionage allegations. In every case, the smaller company either settled for nothing or went bankrupt fighting. And in every case, Axion or Tidewater ended up with the technology. How many cases? That I can confirm, 11 over the past 9 years. But Dad, here's the thing. I can't find the venture capital firm that connects them. It's referenced in some of the court documents, mentioned in a few business journals, but when I try to track it down, I hit walls. No public filings, no registered office, no paper trail. Graham felt the familiar tingle at the base of his skull that came when a case stopped being about the evidence in front of you and started being about what someone didn't want you to see. What about the man in the photo? Nothing yet. I'm running it through some databases, but facial recognition on a blurry image is tough. Give me another day. Tessa, I need you to be careful with this. If these people went after Lena's lawyers, I know how to cover my tracks, old man. I've been doing this for 5 years. But her voice softened slightly. Are you sure about this? Really sure? Graham looked around his tiny apartment at the life he'd built out of necessity and resignation. He thought about pushing his maintenance cart through empty hallways, about being so invisible that people literally didn't see him standing 3 feet away. He thought about the moment in the courtroom when he'd spoken up and felt, for the first time in 15 years, like himself again. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. Okay, then I've got your back. But Dad, don't do anything stupid. Define stupid. You know exactly what I mean. She hung up. Graham sat in the silence of his apartment and let himself feel the weight of what he'd started. Then he made more coffee and went back to reading. By 3 a.m, he'd found the first real thread. It was buried in an email chain from 7 years ago, back when Lena had first applied for her patent. The patent examiner assigned to her case had been replaced mid-review, unusual but not unheard of. The replacement examiner had then requested additional technical documentation, extending the review period by 18 months. That examiner's name was Douglas Finch, and according to the correspondence, he'd left the patent office 6 months after Lena's application finally went through. Graham pulled up LinkedIn on his phone. Douglas Finch currently worked as a technical consultant for, he had to read it twice to be sure, Sentinel Holdings Group, the same company that owned Crawford Technologies. Graham sat back and stared at the ceiling. The pattern was forming now, edges sharpening into focus. This wasn't just aggressive litigation. This was systematic. Someone had identified Lena's breakthrough, delayed her patent protection, created a shell company to file their own claim, and then used the legal system to destroy her when she fought back. But who was someone? His phone buzzed again at 6:30, just as gray morning light started filtering through his windows. Lena's name flashed on the screen. I hope you're awake, she said, her voice tight. What happened? I need you to come to my house. Now. Don't take a cab. They'll track it. Take the subway to Grand Central, then another train to Greenwich. I'll have a car meet you at the station. Graham was already pulling on yesterday's clothes. Lena, what's going on? Someone broke into my office last night. They didn't take anything. They left something. And Graham, I don't think we're dealing with lawyers anymore. The line went dead. Graham grabbed his jacket and the stack of files he couldn't risk leaving behind. He took the stairs down 2 at a time, hit the street, and started walking fast toward the nearest subway station. The city was just waking up. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the smell of coffee and exhaust. Graham kept his head down and moved with the crowd, watching reflections in store windows to see if anyone matched his pace. Old habits coming back. The subway ride to Grand Central took 40 minutes. Graham used the time to review his notes, organizing what he knew into a timeline that made the conspiracy visible. Patent examiner replaced. Application delayed. Shell companies created. Legal teams threatened. And now, what? Breaking and entering? Intimidation? Or something worse? The Metro-North train to Greenwich was half empty. Graham sat in the back car and watched Connecticut scroll past, trees going gold and red, houses getting bigger as the city fell away. When his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, his shoulders tensed. Black SUV, driver will know you. Graham deleted the message and put his phone on airplane mode. The Greenwich station was picture-perfect New England, brick and white trim, hanging flower baskets, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Graham found the black SUV idling in the pickup lane. The driver was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and the posture of someone who'd done security work. Mr. Keaton? She didn't wait for confirmation. Get in. They drove in silence through streets that looked like movie sets, enormous houses set back from the road, lawns that could have hosted football games, gates and walls, and security systems that cost more than Graham's annual salary. After 15 minutes, they turned into a private drive that wound through trees before opening onto what could only be called an estate. Lena's house was modernist glass and steel, all clean lines and angles, positioned to overlook Long Island Sound. Security cameras tracked their approach. The driver pulled up to the front entrance where Lena stood waiting, dressed in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than his couch, looking like she hadn't slept. "Thank you for coming," she said as Graham climbed out. "What happened?" "Inside. We need to be careful about what we say outside." She led him through a foyer with 20-foot ceilings, past art that Graham vaguely recognized from museums, into what looked like a home office, all windows and light and expensive furniture. On the desk sat a cardboard box, about the size of a shoebox, sealed with packing tape. "That was on my office desk this morning when security opened up," Lena said. "Building cameras show someone in maintenance coveralls entering at 2 a.m. with a master key. Face covered, no identifying features. In and out in 4 minutes." Graham stared at the box. "Have you opened it?" "No, I called you first." "We should call the police." "And tell them what? That someone left a box on my desk? Graham, I've reported 3 break-ins, 2 threatening letters, and multiple instances of corporate espionage to the police over the past year. You know what they've done? Filed reports, taken statements, and absolutely nothing else." Lena's voice was steady, but Graham could hear the frustration underneath. "Whatever's in that box, it's meant to scare me. I'm not giving them the satisfaction." Graham pulled out his phone and took photos of the box from multiple angles. Then he found a letter opener on Lena's desk and carefully slit the tape, working slowly, watching for anything suspicious. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a file folder. Graham lifted it out and opened it on the desk. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, printed on regular copy paper. Pictures of Lena leaving her office, getting into her car, meeting with her previous legal teams. Pictures of her house from multiple angles. Pictures of her housekeeper, her driver, her assistant. And at the bottom of the stack, a single photograph of Graham himself, taken yesterday outside the courthouse. Someone had drawn a red X over his face. "This is a threat," Graham said quietly. "They're showing you they can get to anyone around you." Lena picked up the photo of Graham, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let you take this case. I should have just... Don't." Graham took the photo back. "This is exactly why I took the case. Because people like this think they can intimidate anyone into submission. They've gotten away with it before. and they'll keep getting away with it until someone stands up. He met her eyes. We're not backing down. Even if it gets dangerous? It's already dangerous. Now we just know it. Lena nodded slowly. She walked to the window and stared out at the water, arms crossed. I need to show you something. The real reason I built this technology. She led Graham deeper into the house, down a flight of stairs to a basement that had been converted into a workshop. It was part laboratory, part machine shop, filled with equipment Graham didn't recognize and prototypes in various stages of assembly. But what caught his attention was the wall covered in photographs and news clippings, all connected by red string like something from a detective show. 3 years ago, Lena said, I discovered that my quantum encryption algorithm wasn't just valuable. It was dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could break almost any existing security system. Financial networks, power grids, classified government databases. Everything we assume is secure would be vulnerable. Graham stepped closer to the wall. The articles were about cyber attacks, infrastructure failures, corporate espionage. You think someone wants it for that reason. I think someone's been trying to get it for exactly that reason. And when I wouldn't sell, they decided to take it. Lena pointed to a photograph Graham recognized, the gray-haired man in the suit. He showed up at a tech conference where I was presenting. Didn't ask questions, didn't network, just watched. 2 weeks later, Crawford Technologies filed their patent. A month after that, they sued me. Who is he? I don't know. But Graham, I had my investigator trace the timing of every attack on my company, every legal filing, every attempt to steal my research. They all connect back to sightings of that man. Graham pulled out his phone and texted Tessa the photos of the wall. Send me everything you have. My daughter's good at finding patterns. They spent the next hour going through Lena's documentation, years of research notes, dated prototypes, witness statements from employees who could testify she'd been working on the technology long before Crawford existed. It was exactly the kind of evidence that should win a case, which meant it was exactly the kind of evidence someone would kill to suppress. We need to move all of this somewhere safe, Graham said. Your office isn't secure, and if they've already broken in once... I have a safety deposit box at a bank in Manhattan. We can... Graham's phone rang, cutting her off. Tessa's name on the screen. He answered on speaker. Dad, we have a problem. Tessa's voice was urgent. I've been digging into Sentinel Holdings like you asked, and I triggered something. Someone noticed. About an hour ago, my work computer got hit with a sophisticated intrusion attempt. My IT department caught it, but whoever did this wasn't some random hacker. They knew exactly what files I was accessing. Lena went pale. Graham felt ice settle in his stomach. Are you safe? For now. I'm at the office with security. But Dad, listen, right before the attack, I found something. The venture capital firm I couldn't trace? It's not a venture capital firm at all. It's a front for a private equity group that specializes in hostile acquisitions of tech companies. And the man behind it? Papers rustled on Tessa's end. His name is Victor Reeves. Former military intelligence, transitioned to private sector in the 90s, made billions buying distressed companies and stripping their assets. He's been investigated 3 times for corporate espionage, but never charged. Graham looked at Lena. Victor Reeves. You recognize that name? No. Should I? Google him. Now. Lena pulled out her tablet and typed. A moment later, her face went white. Oh my God. The screen showed a man in his late 60s, gray suit, military bearing, cold eyes. The same man from the photograph. That's him, Lena whispered. That's the man who's been watching me. Tessa was still talking. Dad, Victor Reeves doesn't just acquire technology. He weaponizes it, sells it to the highest bidder, including foreign governments and private military contractors. If he gets Lena's encryption algorithm, we know, Graham said. Tessa, I need you to go dark. Don't access any of these files from your work computer again. In fact, don't go to work for a few days. Stay somewhere public, somewhere with cameras. Dad, I'm not running. Neither am I, but we need to be smart about this. Graham looked at Lena. Do you have security here? Private firm, ex-police, ex-military. Why? Because we just confirmed that we're up against someone with the resources and will to do whatever it takes, and we need to assume they're watching right now. As if summoned by his words, Lena's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her expression shifted from fear to something harder. "It's my assistant, Marin," Lena answered. "What's wrong?" Graham couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Lena's face cycle through shock, anger, and finally something that looked like understanding. "Okay," Lena said quietly. "Okay, just stay there. Don't leave. I'm coming to you." She hung up and looked at Graham. "Marin just told me she's been getting threatening messages. Someone sent photos of her apartment, her parents' house, her niece's school. They told her if she doesn't cooperate with them, people she loves will get hurt." "Cooperate how?" "They want her to testify, to say she saw me accessing Crawford Technologies' servers, stealing files. They'll write the testimony. She just has to deliver it in court." Graham's mind raced. A planted witness with inside access would be devastating, especially if the jury believed she had no reason to lie. "Where is she now?" "Coffee shop in Midtown. She's terrified. We need to get her somewhere safe and figure out exactly what they want her to say. If we can prove witness tampering, they'll just deny it. It's my word against theirs, and I'm the one on trial." "Not if we get proof." Graham pulled up Tessa's number again. "Tess, you still there?" "Yeah." "I need another favor. Can you help us set up a secure recording of a conversation? Something that'll hold up in court if we need it?" "You're talking about recording whoever's threatening Lena's assistant?" "I'm talking about getting evidence of conspiracy to commit witness tampering, which last I checked was a federal crime." Tessa was quiet for a moment. "I can set something up. Give me 2 hours." "You're the best." "Yeah, well, don't forget that when this is over." Graham hung up and turned to Lena. "We need to move fast. Get Marin to agree to meet with whoever's threatening her. Tell them she'll cooperate, but we'll wire her, record everything, and finally get proof that this goes deeper than a patent dispute. And if they figure out what we're doing, then we'll be in exactly the same position we're in now, fighting for our lives against people who think they're untouchable." Graham met her eyes. "But at least we'll have tried." Lena nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." They drove back into Manhattan in Lena's car, a Tesla that moved through traffic with silent efficiency. Graham used the time to call his landlord and warn him that he might not be home for a few days. It was a short conversation. The landlord seemed surprised Graham had bothered to call at all. Invisibility had its advantages. They met Marin at a restaurant in Chelsea, far enough from the courthouse to feel safe. Lena's assistant was in her early 30s, professionally dressed, but her hands shook when she picked up her coffee cup. Her eyes were red from crying. "I'm so sorry," she said before Lena could speak. "I should have told you right away, but they said if I talked to anyone, they'd—" "It's okay." Lena reached across the table and took Marin's hand. "You're telling me now. That's what matters." Graham pulled out a legal pad. "Marin, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Start from the beginning." The story came out in fragments. 3 weeks ago, Marin had started receiving anonymous texts. First just observations, comments about her routine, places she'd been, then photographs, then explicit threats. The messages said she needed to testify that she'd seen Lena accessing competitors' files, copying proprietary information, acting suspicious. They'd even written out the testimony word for word. "Did they say what would happen if you refused?" Graham asked. "They said accidents happen. That my niece walks to school every day, my parents live alone, and it would be terrible if something went wrong." Marin's voice cracked. "Mr. Keaton, I don't want to lie, but I also can't risk my family." "You won't have to do either," Graham said, "but I need you to do something brave. I need you to contact them, tell them you'll cooperate, and arrange a meeting. And when you meet them, you're going to wear a wire." Marin went pale. "They'll know." "They won't. My daughter's one of the best forensic accountants in the city, and she knows people who specialize in this kind of thing. They'll set you up with equipment that's undetectable." "And then what?" "Then you get them to say, on record, that they're threatening you to commit perjury. We take that to the judge, and this whole case collapses." "And if something goes wrong?" Graham leaned forward. "Marin, I'm not going to lie to you. This is dangerous. But right now, you're already in danger. These people aren't going to just leave you alone if you do what they want. They'll own you. They'll know they can threaten you into anything. The only way out is through." Lena squeezed Marin's hand. I'll make sure you're protected. Private security, safe place to stay, whatever you need. But Graham's right. We have to fight back. Marin closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted. Okay, what do I need to do? 2 hours later, they were in a nondescript office building in Lower Manhattan. Tessa had called in a favor from a colleague who specialized in corporate investigations. The colleague, a woman named Sarah with close-cropped hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent time in law enforcement, fitted Marin with a device so small Graham could barely see it. It's pinned inside your collar, Sarah explained. Transmits to a receiver we'll have nearby. Audio quality is excellent. Range is about 200 feet. Don't touch it. Don't mention it. Just have a normal conversation. Normal, Marin repeated weakly. You can do this, Lena said. Marin pulled out her phone and typed a message with shaking hands. I'll do it. Tell me when and where. The response came back in 30 seconds. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., Brooklyn Bridge Park. Come alone. Graham looked at Sarah. Can you have people in position? Consider it done. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Graham coached Marin on what to say, how to guide the conversation to get clear evidence of the threats. Tessa arrived with more information on Victor Reeves, a file so thick it made Graham's head hurt, and Lena made calls to her security team, arranging protection for Marin's family. By the time evening fell, Graham felt like he'd lived 3 days in one. He stood at the window of Lena's Greenwich house. She'd insisted he stay there rather than go home, and watched the sun set over Long Island Sound. The water turned gold and orange, peaceful and beautiful, and completely at odds with the war they were about to fight. You should eat something, Lena said from behind him. Graham turned. She was holding 2 plates of pasta. Apparently her housekeeper had made dinner. I'm not hungry. You need to keep your strength up. Lena, please. She set the plates down on a coffee table and sat on the couch. I need to pretend for just a few minutes that we're normal people having a normal evening, not a disgraced lawyer and a woman facing federal prison. Graham sat across from her. The pasta was good, simple and perfectly cooked. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Can I ask you something? Lena said finally. Sure. What happened to you 15 years ago? What made you stop being a lawyer? Graham set down his fork. It wasn't a story he told often, or ever, really, but something about the day, about the danger they were both in, made it feel like maybe she deserved to know. I was a public defender, he said. Did it for 10 years, mostly handled drug cases and petty theft. I was good at it. Won more than I lost, kept a lot of people out of prison who didn't deserve to be there. And then I took a case that I shouldn't have. What kind of case? Corruption. A city councilman got caught taking bribes from a development company. It was supposed to be open and shut, but I found evidence that the bribes went higher, much higher. The prosecutor offered my client a deal, but it required naming names. My client refused, said if he talked, he'd end up dead. Lena leaned forward. What did you do? I tried to go around the prosecutor, contacted the FBI, the state attorney general, anyone who would listen. And that's when everything fell apart. Graham looked at his hands. Evidence in my office got contaminated. Witnesses recanted. My client took a plea deal without telling me. And then the Bar Association opened an investigation into my conduct. Someone had filed complaints saying I'd tampered with evidence, coerced witnesses, acted unethically. But you hadn't. No. But I couldn't prove it. By the time the investigation ended, I'd spent every dollar I had on lawyers. My marriage fell apart. My reputation was destroyed. The bar cleared me, but nobody would hire a lawyer who'd been investigated, even if he was innocent. So I took the first job I could get, and I stayed invisible. Until yesterday. Until yesterday, Graham agreed. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Do you regret it? Standing up for your client? Every day for the first 5 years, now? Graham looked at her. Now I regret stopping. I should have kept fighting, should have found a way to expose the corruption even if it meant risking everything. Because they won. The people I was trying to expose, they got away with it, and I ended up pushing a mop cart. But you're fighting now. Yeah, Graham smiled slightly. I'm fighting now. They finished eating. Lena showed Graham to a guest room that was bigger than his entire apartment, with a view of the water and furniture that probably cost more than he made in a year. He stood at the window long after she'd gone to bed, watching lights move across the sound, thinking about tomorrow and what they were about to attempt. His phone buzzed. "Tessa." "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, you?" "I found something else. About Victor Reeves." Papers rustled. "He's not just after Lena's technology. 3 months ago, he made a bid to acquire her entire company. Offered $2 billion, all cash. She turned him down." "She didn't mention that." "Maybe she didn't think it was connected. But Dad, the bid came through Crawford Technologies. They wanted to buy her out, absorb her research, and essentially erase her from her own company." Graham felt pieces clicking together. "So when she refused to sell, they decided to take it another way." "Exactly. This isn't just about a patent. It's about eliminating competition and controlling technology that could be worth tens of billions. Tessa, I need you to be extra careful tomorrow. If they came after you once, I know, I'm staying with a friend tonight, not going to my apartment, not using my regular routes. I'm being smart." "Good." Graham paused. "Thank you for helping with this." "You're my dad." "Of course I'm helping." A pause. "But Dad, when this is over, we need to talk about what comes next, for real this time." "I know." They hung up. Graham sat on the edge of the expensive bed and thought about his daughter, about all the ways he'd failed to be present in her life because he'd been too busy being invisible, about all the conversations they'd avoided because it was easier than facing what he'd become. Tomorrow, if everything went right, they'd have evidence of a conspiracy. They'd have proof that Victor Reeves and his network were trying to steal technology and destroy anyone who got in their way. And if everything went wrong, well, Graham tried not to think about that. He lay down but didn't sleep. Outside, the sound stretched dark and infinite, and somewhere in the city, Victor Reeves was making his own plans. The battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow, they'd find out who was really in control. The next morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of October day that promised rain by evening. Graham woke before dawn in the unfamiliar guest room, his mind already running through every scenario that could go wrong with Marin's meeting. He showered in a bathroom larger than his kitchen, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn yesterday, and made his way downstairs to find Lena already awake, standing at the windows with a mug of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked without turning around. "Not really." Graham accepted the coffee she poured for him. "You having second thoughts?" "About a dozen of them." Lena finally looked at him, and Graham saw the exhaustion in her face. "What if they hurt her? What if the recording doesn't work? What if we're making everything worse?" "Then we adapt. But Lena, we're already past the point of safe choices. They broke into your office, threatened your assistant, went after my daughter. Standing still isn't going to make them stop." "I know. She set down her mug. "I built something beautiful, something that could protect people's privacy, secure their data, keep them safe from surveillance and theft. And instead, it turned into this, a weapon that powerful people want to control." Graham moved to stand beside her at the window. The sound was steel gray in the morning light, choppy with wind. "That's not your fault. You can't control how people try to use what you create. You can only control whether you fight to keep it out of the wrong hands. And if we lose, we haven't lost yet." They drove into Manhattan separately, Graham in an Uber, Lena in her Tesla with a security detail trailing 2 cars back. The plan was to maintain normal routines, show up for court, give no indication they were planning anything. Graham had the case files in a battered messenger bag, looking every inch the desperate lawyer who'd taken on more than he could handle. The courthouse was already swarming with press when he arrived. Cameras tracked his walk from the street to the entrance, reporters shouting questions he didn't answer. Inside, security waved him through with the bored efficiency of people who'd decided he was exactly what he appeared to be. A man in over his head, soon to be forgotten. Perfect. Courtroom 18B was half full when Graham entered. Lena was already at the defense table, reviewing documents with the same focused intensity she'd shown every day. The prosecution team sat across the aisle, confident and relaxed. Dale Cortman was laughing at something one of his associates had said, completely unbothered by the idea that he might lose. Why would he be worried? From his perspective, he was prosecuting a thief with an incompetent lawyer. The outcome was never in doubt. Graham set down his bag and pulled out his notes. Today was cross-examination of the government's star technical expert, a professor from MIT who'd testified yesterday that Lena's algorithm was too similar to Crawford Technologies' work to be coincidental. The man had impressive credentials and a manner that made juries trust him. Breaking his testimony would be crucial. All rise, Judge Fisk entered, and the machinery of the trial ground forward. Courtman called his witness back to the stand, Professor Michael Chen, 50s, wearing an expensive suit that probably hadn't been purchased on a professor's salary. Graham watched him settle into the witness chair with the comfort of someone who'd testified dozens of times. Professor Chen, Courtman began with a smile, yesterday you walked us through your analysis of both Ms. Hartwell's algorithm and Crawford Technologies' patent. Can you summarize your conclusions for the jury? Of course. Chen turned to face the jury box, his voice measured and authoritative. After extensive review, I determined that the two algorithms share core architectural elements that are frankly too specific to be independently derived. The probability of two researchers arriving at identical solutions through parallel development is mathematically negligible. In your expert opinion, what explains this similarity? The only reasonable explanation is that one algorithm was derived from the other. Given the dates of the patent filings and the documentation provided, it appears Ms. Hartwell's work came after and was influenced by Crawford Technologies' research. Courtman nodded gravely. Thank you, Professor. No further questions. Judge Fisk looked at Graham. Mr. Keaton, your witness. Graham stood slowly, letting the moment stretch. He'd learned a long time ago that the first question set the tone. Rush it, and you look desperate. Take your time, and you looked confident. He picked up a document from his table and approached the witness stand. Professor Chen, you're being paid for your testimony today, correct? Chen's expression didn't change. I'm being compensated for my time and expertise, yes, that's standard practice. How much? I charge $1,500 per hour for expert consultation. Graham did the math in his head. And you've spent how many hours on this case? Approximately 80 hours of analysis and testimony preparation. So $120,000. Graham let that number hang in the air. That's quite a lot of money. It reflects the complexity of the analysis required. I'm sure it does. Graham set down the first document and picked up another, Chen's CV. You've testified as an expert witness 43 times in the past 10 years. Is that accurate? Approximately, yes. And in those 43 cases, how many times have you testified on behalf of the plaintiff versus the defendant? Chen shifted slightly. I don't keep those statistics. Well, I do. You've testified for plaintiffs, usually corporations claiming their technology was stolen, 38 times. You've testified for defendants 5 times. Does that sound right? If you say so. Would it surprise you to know that in 36 of those 38 cases, the plaintiff won? Courtman stood. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? Your Honor, Graham said calmly, I'm establishing the witness's pattern of testimony and whether there might be a financial incentive to reach particular conclusions. Judge Fisk considered. I'll allow it, but get to your point, Mr. Keaton. Graham turned back to Chen. Professor, isn't it true that you've become known in certain corporate circles as an expert who reliably testifies in favor of whoever's paying him? Absolutely not. Chen's voice was sharp now. My testimony is based on rigorous scientific analysis. Then let's talk about that analysis. Graham pulled out a thick technical document. You stated that the similarity between Ms. Hartwell's algorithm and Crawford's patent is too specific to be coincidental. But you're aware, aren't you, that both algorithms are based on foundational quantum mechanics principles that have been publicly available for decades? Of course, but the specific implementation uses a technique called quantum key distribution, correct? Yes. And quantum key distribution was first proposed in 1984 by Bennett and Brassard at IBM? That's correct, and refined by Eckert in 1991, then further developed by Lowe and Chow in 1999? Graham was reading from academic papers now, each one marked with sticky notes. In fact, Professor, there have been over 200 published papers on quantum key distribution in the past 20 years. Would you agree? Chen's jaw tightened. The field is well studied. So when you say the similarity is too specific to be coincidental, what you really mean is that both Miss Hartwell and Crawford Technologies use techniques that are standard in the field, derived from publicly available research that any competent quantum physicist would know. Isn't that true? The specific combination of techniques. Let me ask you something else, Professor. Graham switched documents, this time pulling out Crawford's patent filing. You reviewed Crawford Technologies' patent dated 3 years ago, correct? Yes. And you found it to be groundbreaking work? Very sophisticated, yes. Did you review the personnel records for Crawford Technologies to see who actually developed this algorithm? Chen hesitated. That information wasn't provided to me. Did you ask for it? No, my analysis focused on the technical documents themselves. Graham turned to Judge Fisk. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Crawford Technologies' employee records for the period when their patent was filed. Courtman was on his feet. Objection. These documents weren't disclosed during discovery. Because the prosecution never requested them, Graham said. Ms. Hartwell subpoenaed them 2 weeks ago. They're properly authenticated and relevant to the witness's testimony. Judge Fisk nodded. I'll allow it. The jury will disregard Mr. Courtman's objection. Graham approached the witness stand with a printout. Professor Chen, according to these records, Crawford Technologies employed exactly 3 quantum physicists during the period when their patent was developed. Do you see their names here? Chen scanned the document. Yes. And do you recognize any of those names? No. That's interesting, because you've published extensively in quantum physics, and you've certainly heard of the major researchers in the field. Yet none of these 3 have published a single peer-reviewed paper. None have PhDs from accredited universities. In fact, Graham pulled out another document. 2 of them have bachelor's degrees in computer science, and the third has a degree in electrical engineering. Does that strike you as odd for people who supposedly developed a groundbreaking quantum encryption algorithm? Chen's face had gone carefully neutral. I can't speak to their qualifications. But you testified that Crawford's algorithm was too sophisticated to be independently derived. How could 3 people with no background in quantum physics create something that's sophisticated? Perhaps they consulted with outside experts. Or perhaps, Graham said quietly, they copied it from someone who actually did have the expertise. Someone like Lena Hartwell, who has a PhD in quantum physics from Stanford, has published 47 peer-reviewed papers and has been working on quantum encryption for the past decade. The courtroom was silent. Graham could feel the jury's attention shifting, see the doubt creeping into their expressions. Professor Chen, let me ask you one more question. Have you ever received compensation from Crawford Technologies outside of this case? No. Not directly. Not directly? What does that mean? Chen's face flushed. I've done consulting work for Sentinel Holdings Group, which is the parent company that owns Crawford Technologies. How much have they paid you in the past 3 years? I don't have those figures memorized. Would it surprise you to know it's over $400,000? Graham pulled out bank records that Tessa had managed to track down. Consulting fees, speaking engagements, research grants, all from companies connected to Victor Reeves and his network. You're not an independent expert, Professor Chen. You're on their payroll. Courtman was objecting, Judge Fisk was banging her gavel, and the gallery was erupting into noise. But Graham saw what he needed to see. The jury looking at Chen with skepticism, the cracks forming in the prosecution's case. When order was restored, Graham turned back to the witness. No further questions. Judge Fisk called a recess. Graham returned to the defense table where Lena was staring at him with something like awe. How did you find all that? She whispered. Tessa. She spent all night digging through corporate records and financial disclosures. Turns out Victor Reeves has a habit of keeping experts on retainer, just in case he needs someone to testify in his favor. That was brilliant. That was just the opening. We still have a long way to go. But Graham could feel it now, the shift in momentum, the sense that maybe they weren't as outmatched as everyone thought. He checked his phone. 5 hours until Marin's meeting in Brooklyn Bridge Park. 5 hours until they'd know if this could really work. The afternoon session was routine. More technical testimony, more attempts by Courtman to rebuild his expert's credibility. Graham objected when necessary, took notes, and kept his expression neutral. But his mind was elsewhere, running through contingencies for the evening. When court finally adjourned at 4:30, Graham and Lena gathered their materials quickly. "I need to check on Marin," Lena said. "Make sure she's ready." "I'll meet you there. I want to coordinate with the surveillance team first." They split up outside the courthouse. Graham took the subway to Brooklyn, getting off at Brooklyn Bridge Park and walking the perimeter. The park was beautiful in the late afternoon light, views of Manhattan across the East River, families playing on the lawns, runners on the paths. It looked peaceful and safe, which was exactly what made it dangerous. Sarah, the investigator Tessa had connected them with, was waiting near the carousel, dressed like a tourist with a camera. She nodded when Graham approached. "We've got 4 people positioned around the park," she said quietly. 2 on the paths, 2 in vehicles nearby. Marin's wearing the wire. We'll hear everything." "How close can you get without being spotted?" "Close enough. These people are pros, but so are we." Sarah met his eyes. "Mr. Keaton, you should know. We ran the description you gave us of Victor Reeves through some databases. The man's not just connected. He's got ties to private military contractors, intelligence community consultants, people who don't show up on any official lists. If this goes sideways, I know, we're careful." Careful might not be enough. Graham's phone buzzed. Marin, texting that she was on her way. He could see her in the distance, walking slowly along the waterfront path, shoulders tense, hands in her jacket pockets. She looked terrified. He wanted to tell her it would be okay, but he couldn't promise that. At 6 o'clock exactly, a man approached Marin, mid-30s, athletic build, wearing running clothes like he belonged in the park. Graham couldn't hear their conversation, but he watched Marin's body language, the way she stood rigid, the way she nodded too quickly. Sarah had her phone out, monitoring the audio feed. "She's getting him to talk. Good. She's asking who sent him." Graham moved closer, staying behind a group of tourists. The man was talking now, his voice carrying across the water to the hidden microphones. Graham saw Sarah's expression change. "He's admitting to the threats," she whispered. "He's actually telling her what to say in court, giving her specific testimony." "Who's he working for?" Sarah listened. "He's being careful. Not using names, but wait." Her eyes widened. "He just said the boss wants this wrapped up before the federal investigation starts." "What federal investigation?" Graham's blood went cold. "Give me that phone." He listened to the live feed. The man was still talking, his voice casual like he was discussing the weather. "Look, all you have to do is get on the stand, say, you saw her accessing files she shouldn't have, and this all goes away. Nobody gets hurt. Your family stays safe. It's easy." "And if I say no?" Marin's voice was shaking but clear. "Then accidents happen. You understand? Your niece, she's 7, right? Takes the school bus every day? Be a shame if I understand." Marin cut him off. "I'll do it. But I need a guarantee. Something that proves you'll leave my family alone. You don't get guarantees, you get to keep breathing. That's the guarantee." Graham saw it happening a split second before it did. Marin reaching for something in her pocket, the man's expression shifting from casual to alert. His hand moved toward his jacket, and Graham was already running. "She's in trouble," Sarah shouted into her radio. "All units move in." The man grabbed Marin's arm, pulling her toward the railing. Graham crashed into him from the side, sending all 3 of them stumbling. The man was fast, trained, already recovering and reaching for what Graham realized with sick certainty was a weapon. Then Sarah was there, along with 2 other investigators who'd appeared from nowhere. The man found himself surrounded, hands reaching for his jacket, voices shouting, "Federal agents, show me your hands!" For a moment, Graham thought the man would fight. His eyes flickered between the investigators, calculating odds. Then he raised his hand slowly. "This is a mistake," he said calmly. "I'm just talking to a friend." "Save it." Sarah had him cuffed in seconds. "You just threatened a witness in a federal case. We've got every word on tape." More people were converging now, actual federal agents who'd apparently been monitoring the situation. Graham stepped back, heart pounding, and found Marin standing frozen by the railing. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but tears were streaming down her face. "I thought he was going to—" "He didn't. You did great." One of the federal agents approached Graham, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a badge that read FBI. "You're Graham Keaton?" "Yes." "Special Agent Lisa Monroe. We need to talk. Now." Graham glanced at Marin, who Sarah was leading away to get a statement. Then he followed Agent Monroe to a black SUV parked nearby. Inside, another agent was already reviewing the audio recording from Marin's wire. "Mr. Keaton," Monroe said, "how much do you know about Victor Reeves?" "Enough to know he's dangerous, not enough to know why the FBI is interested. We've been building a case against Reeves for 18 months, corporate espionage, witness intimidation, conspiracy to commit fraud, you name it, but he's careful. Very careful. We've never been able to get direct evidence connecting him to any of the crimes." She pulled out a tablet and showed Graham a photograph. "Until now. The man we just arrested? His name is Marcus Webb, former military contractor currently employed by a shell company owned by Sentinel Holdings. And thanks to your client's assistant, we just got him on tape admitting to witness tampering." Graham's mind raced. "You've been watching this case?" "Since the moment it was filed. We knew something was wrong. Too many lawyers quitting, too much pressure on a single defendant, patterns that matched Reeves's previous operations. But we couldn't intervene without evidence. Now we have it." "What happens next?" Monroe looked at him steadily. "We arrest everyone connected to the conspiracy. But Mr. Keaton, I need you to understand something. This goes deep. Reeves has been systematically targeting tech companies for years, stealing their innovations, destroying anyone who fights back. Your client isn't his first victim. She's just the first one who refused to give up." "How many others?" "We've identified 11 companies that went bankrupt fighting him, 4 more that settled for nothing to make the litigation stop, and at least 3 individuals who died in what were ruled accidents, but that we now believe were targeted killings." Graham felt ice in his stomach. "You think he'd kill Lena?" "I think he'd do whatever it takes to get what he wants." "And Mr. Keaton, he's not done yet. The fact that you caught one of his operatives doesn't mean you've won. It just means he knows you're a threat." As if summoned by her words, Graham's phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him press accept. "Mr. Keaton?" The voice was male, older, calm. "My name is Victor Reeves. I think it's time we had a conversation." Graham's hand tightened on the phone. Agent Monroe leaned closer, listening. "I have nothing to say to you," Graham said. "That's unfortunate, because I have a great deal to say to you." Reeves' voice was cultured, almost gentle. "You've been causing problems, Mr. Keaton. Making noise, asking questions. That's understandable. Ms. Hartwell is paying you, and you're trying to earn your fee, but you're in over your head." "Am I?" "You have a daughter, Tessa, brilliant young woman, works for the Coalition Against Corruption, lives in that charming apartment in Park Slope. She was home about an hour ago, if I'm not mistaken." Graham's blood turned to ice. "If you touch her—" "I'm not threatening her, Mr. Keaton. I'm simply observing that the world is dangerous. Accidents happen, especially to people who make themselves targets." Reeves paused. "You still have a chance to walk away. Drop the case. Convince Ms. Hartwell to settle. Everyone goes home safe. Continue fighting, and I can't guarantee anyone's safety. Do you understand?" "I understand you're scared," Graham said. "I understand that for the first time in years, someone's pushing back, and you don't know how to handle it. And I understand that this conversation is being recorded by federal agents, and you just admitted to threatening my daughter." There was a long silence. "You're making a mistake," Reeves said finally. His voice was still calm, but something cold had entered it. "A very serious mistake." The line went dead. Agent Monroe was already on her radio, dispatching agents to Tessa's apartment. Graham tried calling his daughter. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. "We'll get to her," Monroe said. "We have people close." "How close?" 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like hours. Graham sat in the back of the SUV, phone in his hand, trying not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. He'd stepped out of invisibility, stood up in court, and now his daughter was in danger because of it. His phone rang again. Tessa. Dad? Her voice was shaky. There are men outside my building. 2 of them. They've been there for 20 minutes. Lock your door. Don't let anyone in. The FBI is sending agents, but... FBI, Dad, what's happening? Tessa, just trust me. Stay inside, stay away from the windows, and wait for the agents. They'll identify themselves properly. You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. Just please do what I'm saying. He heard sirens through the phone. Distant at first, then louder. Tessa's breathing was rapid, panicked, then voices outside her door, professional and authoritative. FBI, we're here to escort Tessa Keaton to safety. Graham heard his daughter ask for identification, heard the agents comply, heard her door open, then her voice again, stronger now. Dad, I'm okay. They're here. Graham closed his eyes. Thank God. What is happening? We got evidence against Victor Reeves, and he responded by threatening you. The FBI is going to keep you safe while they make arrests. Arrests? How many people are involved in this? More than we thought. Tessa, I'm so sorry. I never meant to put you in danger. Stop apologizing and finish what you started. His daughter's voice was firm now. If this man has been destroying companies and hurting people for years, then you need to take him down. I can handle being scared for a few days. Just promise me you'll be careful. I promise. I love you, Dad. I love you too. They hung up. Graham sat in the silence of the SUV, feeling the weight of what they'd unleashed. Agent Monroe was coordinating with her team, talking about warrants and tactical operations. Outside, Brooklyn Bridge Park had been cordoned off, police lights flashing in the gathering darkness. Graham's phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Are you okay? I heard what happened. He called her. I'm fine. Marin's fine. They got the man on tape admitting to witness tampering. The news is saying federal agents made an arrest. Is that... It's bigger than we thought. The FBI's been investigating Reeves for 18 months. We just gave them the evidence they needed. Graham paused. But Lena, he knows we're coming for him now. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Should we pull back? We can't. Not anymore. We're past that point. There was a long silence. Then Lena said quietly, My security chief just called. Someone tried to breach the perimeter at my house. They didn't get in, but Graham, they tried. Right after sunset, right when everyone would be settling in for the evening. Where are you now? Still at the estate. Security has it locked down. But I'm not safe here, am I? Not really. Pack a bag. The FBI can put you in protective custody until... No. Lena's voice was firm. I'm not hiding. I'm not running. If Victor Reeves wants a war, then we'll give him one. But we do it smart. We do it together. And we make sure everyone we care about is protected. Graham felt a surge of respect for this woman who'd refused to be broken by everything thrown at her. Okay, but we're consolidating. My daughter, you, Marin, everyone under one roof where the FBI can maintain security. And tomorrow, we go back into court and we destroy their case piece by piece. What about Reeves? Agent Monroe says they're moving tonight. By morning, half his operation should be under arrest. And if they miss someone, then we deal with it, Graham said. Together. Agent Monroe ended her call and turned to Graham. We're moving your daughter to a secure location. I'd like to do the same with you and Ms. Hartwell. There's a federal facility in Manhattan. No. We need to be able to get to court tomorrow. Can you secure Lena's estate? Monroe considered. It's easier to defend than most locations. If her security team cooperates with our agents, yes. We can make it work. Then that's what we do. 2 hours later, Graham found himself back at Lena's Greenwich estate, this time accompanied by Tessa and Marin, with FBI agents stationed throughout the property and local police patrolling the roads. The house felt more like a fortress than a home, but it was safe. Lena had ordered food, pizza and Chinese, comfort food that nobody really tasted but everyone needed. They sat in the main living room with its views of the darkened sound, trying to process everything that had happened. So let me get this straight, Tessa said, holding a slice of pizza she wasn't eating. Victor Reeves has been running a corporate espionage operation for years, stealing technology from small companies, and nobody stopped him because he's rich and connected? That's the short version, Graham said. And now the FBI is arresting everyone involved, but they're not sure they'll get Reeves himself because he's careful about not leaving evidence? Also accurate. And meanwhile, we have to go back to court tomorrow and continue fighting the case, even though the entire prosecution is based on lies? Welcome to the justice system, Graham said dryly. Lena set down her wine glass. I keep thinking about all the other companies he destroyed, all the people who lost everything because they couldn't fight back. How many innovations never made it to market because Reeves stole them first? We can't change what happened to them, Graham said, but we can make sure it doesn't happen to you. And maybe, if the FBI builds a strong enough case, we can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That's optimistic, Tessa said. I'm not known for optimism, but sometimes you have to believe the system can work, even when it usually doesn't. They talked late into the night, about the trial, about the evidence they still needed to present, about the FBI's investigation. Gradually, exhaustion caught up with everyone. Marin fell asleep on the couch. Tessa retreated to a guest room, and Graham found himself alone with Lena on the deck overlooking the water. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. I know this isn't what you signed up for. I signed up to defend you. This is part of it. You could have walked away a dozen times. After the threats, after they went after Tessa. Most people would have. Graham thought about that. I spent 15 years walking away from everything that mattered, making myself small and invisible because it was safer than fighting. But you can't live like that forever. Eventually, you have to decide what you're willing to stand up for. And you decided to stand up for me. I decided to stand up for what's right. You're just the person who reminded me I could. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, what happens if we lose? If the FBI can't get Reeves? If the trial goes wrong? If we don't lose, Graham said firmly. We've come too far. We know too much. And tomorrow we're going to walk into that courtroom and show the jury exactly who's been pulling the strings. You sound confident. I'm terrified, but I'm done showing it. They stood in the darkness, watching lights move across the distant water, and Graham felt the weight of everything they were about to face. Tomorrow would be pivotal. Tomorrow would determine whether justice could actually win against money and power. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were together. And tonight, for the first time in a very long time, Graham Keaton felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, fighting for someone who deserved it, with people he trusted at his back, against an enemy who finally had a reason to be afraid. The war wasn't over. But they'd just won their first real battle. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it news that changed everything. Graham was up at 5, making coffee in Lena's enormous kitchen when Agent Monroe called. We executed warrants on 7 locations overnight, she said without preamble. Arrested 12 individuals connected to Reeves's operation. But there's a problem. Graham's hand tightened on his phone. What kind of problem? Victor Reeves is gone. His apartment is empty, his office cleared out, and his private jet left Teterboro Airport at 3 this morning. We don't know where he went. How is that possible? You were watching him. We were watching the people around him. We didn't have enough evidence for an arrest warrant on Reeves himself yet, just his operatives. He must have known we were moving and got out ahead of it. Monroe's frustration was audible. But Mr. Keaton, we did get something important. Marcus Webb, the man we arrested in the park, he's talking, offering to testify in exchange for a deal. And he's confirmed that the entire case against Ms. Hartwell was orchestrated by Reeves to force her to sell her company. Will the prosecutor drop the charges? That's complicated. The U.S. Attorney's Office is reviewing everything, but these things take time. You need to be prepared to continue the trial while they decide. Graham heard footsteps behind him. Lena appeared in the doorway, already dressed for court, her face tight with tension. How long? Graham asked Monroe. Could be days, could be weeks. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear. No, it's not. Graham thanked her and hung up. He turned to find Lena watching him with a mixture of hope and dread. Reeves is gone, he said, ran before the FBI could arrest him, but they have people willing to testify about the conspiracy. Does that mean the case is over? Not yet. We still have to go to court and fight this the old-fashioned way. Graham poured her coffee. But Lena, we have momentum now. The jury's already seen cracks in the prosecution's case. Today, we're going to blow it wide open. They arrived at the courthouse 2 hours later in a convoy that included FBI agents and Lena's security team. The press presence had doubled overnight. Word had leaked about the arrests, and reporters were screaming questions about federal investigations and corporate conspiracies. Graham kept his head down and pushed through. Inside courtroom 18B, the atmosphere had shifted. Dale Cortman was conferring intensely with his team, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like panic. He kept glancing at his phone, checking messages, clearly aware that his case was collapsing, but unable to do anything about it. Judge Fisk took the bench precisely on time. Counsel, before we bring in the jury, I need to address something. The court has been made aware of arrests related to this case. Mr. Cortman, has the U.S. Attorney's Office provided any guidance on how to proceed? Cortman stood, his expression carefully controlled. Your Honor, we're evaluating the situation. At this time, we're prepared to continue with our case. Mr. Keaton, Graham rose. The defense is ready to proceed, Your Honor. We have several witnesses we'd like to call, and we have evidence we'd like to enter that directly contradicts the prosecution's theory. Very well. Bring in the jury. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in controlled demolition. Graham called witness after witness, former employees of Crawford Technologies who testified they'd never seen the quantum encryption research that supposedly predated Lena's work. He presented emails showing that Crawford's technical team had struggled with basic concepts that Lena had mastered years earlier. He introduced expert testimony from researchers who confirmed that Lena's published papers proved she'd been working on this technology long before Crawford Technologies even existed. And then, during the afternoon session, Graham played his trump card. The defense calls Marin Vale. Lena's assistant walked to the stand with remarkable composure, considering what she'd been through. She was sworn in, settled into the witness chair, and looked directly at Graham with determination in her eyes. Ms. Vale, Graham began gently, how long have you worked for Lena Hartwell? 6 years. And in that time, have you had access to Ms. Hartwell's files, emails, and research? Yes. As her executive assistant, I help organize her work and manage her schedule. Did you ever see Ms. Hartwell access files belonging to Crawford Technologies? No, never. Did you ever see her copy proprietary information from any competitor? No. Ms. Vale, were you approached by anyone and asked to testify against Ms. Hartwell? Marin took a breath. Yes. 3 weeks ago, I started receiving threatening messages. Someone sent photos of my family, details about their daily routines. They told me I needed to testify that I'd seen Ms. Hartwell stealing research. The courtroom erupted. Cortman shot to his feet. Objection! This is hearsay and irrelevant to— Your Honor, Graham said calmly, this goes directly to the question of whether this prosecution is legitimate or whether it's part of a broader conspiracy. And I have evidence. Judge Fisk banged her gavel. I'll allow it. Mr. Cortman, sit down. Graham approached the witness stand with the laptop. Ms. Vale, are these the messages you received? Marin nodded as Graham displayed screenshot after screenshot. Threats, photos, detailed instructions on what to say in court. The jury leaned forward, their expression shifting from confusion to shock to anger. And Ms. Vale, yesterday evening, did you meet with the person who sent these threats? Yes, in Brooklyn Bridge Park. He told me I had to lie on the stand or my family would be hurt. He said his boss wanted this case finished before a federal investigation started. Who was his boss? He didn't say the name, but he said the boss wants this wrapped up. That's what he kept saying. And this conversation was recorded? Yes. Graham turned to Judge Fisk. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the audio recording of that conversation, along with documentation of the federal arrest that resulted from it. Cortman was objecting again, but his heart wasn't in it. Judge Fisk allowed the evidence, and Graham played the recording for the jury. Marcus Webb's voice filled the courtroom, casual and threatening, describing exactly how he wanted Marin to commit perjury. When it finished, the silence was absolute. Graham turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard is evidence of a conspiracy to manufacture a criminal case against Lena Hartwell. This isn't about patent infringement or stolen technology. This is about powerful people trying to destroy someone who refused to surrender what she'd built. He called more witnesses, FBI agents who testified about the arrests, corporate investigators who'd traced the shell companies back to Victor Reeves, technical experts who demonstrated that Lena's algorithm predated Crawford's by years. By the time Graham rested the defense case, the prosecution's theory was in ruins. Judge Fisk called a sidebar. Graham and Courtman approached the bench. "Mr. Courtman," the judge said quietly, "do you want to explain what's happening here?" Courtman's face was pale. "Your Honor, I was assigned this case 9 months ago. I was given evidence by investigators, and I presented it in good faith. I had no knowledge of any conspiracy." "That may be true, but your case is falling apart. Do you have any rebuttal evidence?" No, Your Honor, not at this time." Judge Fisk looked at him for a long moment. "Then I suggest you speak with the U.S. Attorney's Office. This court will recess until tomorrow morning, at which time I expect you to inform me whether the government wishes to continue this prosecution." Graham returned to the defense table where Lena was sitting with tears in her eyes. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Not yet, but we're close." They gathered their materials and headed for the exit. The press was waiting, a wall of cameras and microphones and shouted questions. Graham was about to push through when Lena stopped him. "I want to make a statement," she said. "Lena, you don't have to. I want to." She turned to face the cameras, and Graham saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not just determination, but fury. "My name is Lena Hartwell," she began, her voice clear and strong. "For the past year, I've been fighting against criminal charges that I knew were false. I've watched my company nearly destroyed, my reputation attacked, and my life threatened. And I've discovered that the case against me was manufactured by a corporate conspiracy designed to steal technology I spent years developing." The cameras were rolling, reporters were silent, hanging on every word. "Victor Reeves and his network have been doing this for years, targeting innovators, stealing their work, and using the legal system as a weapon. I'm not their first victim, but I'm determined to be their last." Lena's voice hardened. "I'm not going to settle. I'm not going to be intimidated. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what was done here so it can never happen again." She turned and walked away, Graham following close behind. The questions started up again, but they ignored them all. In the car heading back to Greenwich, Lena finally let herself shake. "I can't believe I just did that." "You were incredible and," Graham said, "I was terrified." Didn't show. Tessa was waiting at the estate when they arrived, along with Agent Monroe. The FBI agent had news. "We're getting cooperation from everyone we arrested," Monroe said. 6 people have already agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. They're all confirming the same story. Victor Reeves has been running a systematic operation to identify valuable technology, create shell companies to file competing patents, and then use litigation to bankrupt the original inventors. "How many victims?" Lena asked. "We've identified 14 companies over the past 8 years. Probably more we don't know about yet." Monroe pulled out a tablet showing organizational charts. The operation was sophisticated. Different shell companies for different targets, carefully structured to hide Reeves's involvement. But once we started pulling the thread, it all unraveled. "What about Reeves himself?" Graham asked. "Any sign of him?" "Not yet, but we've frozen his assets, issued international warrants, and contacted Interpol. He can run, but he can't hide forever." Graham wasn't so sure. Men like Victor Reeves had contingency plans, offshore accounts, false identities, places they could disappear and never be found. But he kept that thought to himself. The evening passed in a strange limbo. They ordered dinner, reviewed documents, and waited for word from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Tessa worked on her laptop, compiling everything they knew about Reeves's network. Marin called her family, reassuring them that the threat was over. And Graham sat with Lena on the deck, watching the sun set over the Sound. "What happens after?" Lena asked quietly. "After what?" "After the trial ends. After the charges are dropped. After all of this is over." She turned to look at him. "What do? Go back to pushing a maintenance cart?" Graham had been thinking about that question for 2 days. No, I don't think I can do that anymore. Then what? I don't know yet. But Lena, for the first time in 15 years, I actually care about the answer. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. They sat in silence, and Graham felt something shifting between them. A recognition that they'd been through a war together and come out the other side changed. He didn't have words for it yet, but he could feel it in the air. His phone rang at 9:30. Dale Cortman's name on the screen. Mr. Keaton, the prosecutor said without preamble, the U.S. Attorney's Office has reviewed the evidence that came to light today. We're filing a motion to dismiss all charges against Ms. Hartwell. It'll be presented to Judge Fisk tomorrow morning. Graham closed his eyes, relief washing through him. Thank you for letting me know. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was being fed. I should have looked harder. Yeah, you should have. Cortman hung up. Graham turned to Lena, who was watching him with barely contained hope. They're dropping the charges, he said. It's over. Lena's face crumpled. She put her hands over her mouth, and Graham could see her trying not to cry. Then she gave up and let the tears come, months of fear and stress and exhaustion pouring out all at once. Graham put his arms around her, and she held on like she was drowning. It's over, he said again. You're free. But even as he said it, Graham knew it wasn't entirely true. Victor Reeves was still out there. The conspiracy had been exposed, but the man behind it had escaped. And something about that felt unfinished, dangerous, like a storm that had passed but left damage waiting to be discovered. They went inside and told the others. Tessa hugged her father with a fierceness that surprised him. Marin cried with relief. Agent Monroe congratulated them, but reminded everyone that Reeves was still a threat until he was captured. We're maintaining security here until further notice, Monroe said. Reeves has lost his operation, his people, and his reputation. That makes him desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. You think he'd still come after Lena? Graham asked. I think he spent years building an empire, and Ms. Hartwell destroyed it in a week. Yes, I think he might try something, so we stay careful. That night, Graham couldn't sleep. He stood in the guest room watching the dark water, thinking about everything that had happened. A week ago, he'd been invisible, a janitor pushing a cart through empty hallways, hiding from the world. Now he'd defended a billionaire in federal court, exposed a massive conspiracy, and helped bring down a criminal network. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt unsettled. At 2 a.m, he heard a sound downstairs. Probably just the security team making rounds. But Graham pulled on his jeans and went to check anyway. The house was dark, except for the glow of security monitors in the main room. He was heading back upstairs when he heard voices, low and urgent. He followed them to Lena's office. The door was cracked open, light spilling out. Inside, Lena was on the phone, her voice tight with tension. I don't care what it costs, she was saying. I want to know where he is. Every resource we have, every investigator, every contact. Find Victor Reeves. Graham pushed the door open. Lena turned, startled. I'll call you back, she said, and hung up. What are you doing? Graham asked. What the FBI won't. They're looking for Reeves through official channels, warrants and Interpol and bureaucratic procedures. But I have resources they don't. Private investigators who don't care about jurisdictional limits. People who can go places law enforcement can't. Lena, that's dangerous. So was everything else we did. Graham, this man tried to destroy me. He threatened my employees, attacked my company, and almost sent me to prison. I'm not going to just wait for him to disappear into some country without extradition. I want him found. I want him held accountable. Graham understood the impulse, the need to finish what they'd started, to make sure the threat was really gone. But he also knew that hunting a man like Victor Reeves could lead them into darker territory than a courtroom. Let the FBI handle it, he said. The FBI has rules. I don't. Lena, would you let it go? If someone had done this to you, would you just walk away? Graham thought about that, about the people who'd framed him 15 years ago, destroyed his career, forced him into invisibility. He'd never gotten justice. He'd never even gotten answers, and it had eaten at him every day since. No, he admitted. I wouldn't. Then don't ask me to. She turned back to her computer, pulling up files and documents. Graham watched her for a moment, recognizing the determination in her posture. She'd fought too hard to stop now. "If you're going to do this," he said finally, "you need to be smart about it. No going off alone, no taking unnecessary risks, and you keep the FBI informed. They might have rules, but they also have resources and training." Lena looked at him. "Does that mean you're helping?" "Someone has to keep you from doing something stupid." A small smile crossed her face. "Thank you." They worked through the night, coordinating with the investigators Lena had on retainer, building a network of contacts who could track financial movements and travel patterns. By dawn, they had 3 potential leads, cities where Reeves had connections and assets. Agent Monroe arrived at 7 and was less than thrilled to discover what they'd been doing. "This is vigilantism," she said flatly. "You're civilians. Let us handle this." "Your investigation is moving too slowly," Lena said. "By the time you navigate international law enforcement cooperation, Reeves will have buried himself so deep you'll never find him." "And your way is what? Hire mercenaries to kidnap him?" "My way is to use every legal resource available to locate him and then turn that information over to you. I'm not planning to break any laws, Agent Monroe. I'm just planning to work faster than your bureaucracy allows." Monroe looked at Graham. "And you support this?" "I support making sure a criminal who hurt a lot of people faces justice. If that means helping Lena gather information, then yes." The FBI agent sighed. "Fine, but you share everything you find with us immediately. And if you discover Reeves's location, you do not, I repeat, do not attempt to approach him yourself. This man has already demonstrated he's willing to hurt people. He's even more dangerous now that he's cornered." "Understood," Lena said. Monroe left, muttering about civilians and jurisdictional nightmares. Graham poured more coffee and settled in beside Lena at her computer. "Where do we start?" he asked. "We follow the money. Reeves has offshore accounts, but he has to access them somehow. We track the transactions, identify the patterns, and figure out where he's hiding." It was painstaking work, following digital breadcrumbs through layers of shell companies and encrypted transfers. But Lena's investigators were good, and by mid-morning, they had their first real lead. "Wire transfer from a Cayman Islands account to a property management company in Zurich," Tessa said, pulling up the transaction on her laptop. She'd joined them an hour earlier, unable to stay away. $5 million, moved 3 hours after Reeves left the country. "Zurich," Graham repeated. "That's not an easy city to hide in. Lots of cameras, organized police, international cooperation." "Unless you have connections," Lena said. "Zurich's also home to some of the most secretive private banks in the world. If Reeves has relationships there—" Her phone rang. One of her investigators, calling from Europe. "We found him," the investigator said, "or at least we found where he's been. Hotel in Zurich, checked in under an alias. But Ms. Hartwell, you need to know, he's not alone. He has security with him, and they're well armed." Lena put the phone on speaker. "Can you confirm he's still there?" "Not definitively. He checked in 36 hours ago, hasn't checked out, but we can't get eyes inside the hotel without alerting him." "Send me the details, everything you have." Lena looked at Graham. "We need to call Monroe." "Already dialing," Graham said. The next few hours were a blur of coordination. Agent Monroe contacted Interpol, Swiss authorities were notified, and a plan was put together to apprehend Reeves without incident. Graham and Lena stayed on the phone throughout, providing information and updates, watching their carefully gathered intelligence turn into an actual operation. At 4 in the afternoon Eastern Time, 10 at night in Zurich, Swiss police moved in. They monitored it remotely through Monroe's encrypted connection. Graham watched grainy security footage as tactical units surrounded the hotel, entered through multiple access points, and moved floor by floor toward Reeves's suite. And then it went wrong. "Shots fired!" someone shouted through the radio feed. "Suspect is armed and barricaded." The audio cut to chaos. Multiple voices, gunfire, commands in German and English overlapping. Graham felt Lena's hand find his, gripping tight. It lasted 90 seconds that felt like hours. Then, "Suspect in custody. 2 security personnel wounded, no officers down. Building is secure." Graham let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Lena's hand was shaking in his. "They got him," she whispered. They got him. Agent Monroe came back on the line. Victor Reeves is in custody. Swiss authorities will hold him pending extradition. Mr. Keaton, Ms. Hartwell, it's over. It's really over. This time, Graham believed it. The news broke within the hour. International headlines about the arrest of a corporate espionage mastermind. Graham's phone exploded with messages from reporters, from lawyers he hadn't spoken to in years, from people who'd suddenly decided a janitor turned lawyer was worth knowing. He ignored most of them. At the estate that evening, they gathered everyone who'd been part of the fight: Tessa, Marin, the security team, even Agent Monroe. Lena ordered food from the best restaurant in Greenwich, opened wine that probably cost more than Graham's monthly rent, and made a toast. To the people who refused to look away, she said, raising her glass. To the ones who stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. And to Graham Keaton, who reminded me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway. They drank, and Graham felt something unfamiliar warming his chest. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction. The feeling that he'd done something that mattered. Later, after the others had drifted away, Graham found himself alone with Lena on the deck one more time. The night was clear, stars visible despite the light pollution from the city. What now? He asked. Now I rebuild. My company, my reputation, my life. Lena looked at him. And I was hoping you'd help. Help how? I'm starting a foundation. Justice initiative focused on helping individuals and small companies fight back against corporate bullying. We'll provide legal support, investigation resources, public advocacy, everything we needed but almost didn't have. She paused. I want you to run it. Graham stared at her. Lena, I haven't practiced law in... You just took down $1 billion conspiracy in federal court. I think you're qualified. She smiled. Graham, you're brilliant. You always were. You just spent 15 years convincing yourself otherwise. Don't do that anymore. I don't know if I can. You can. And more than that, you should. Because there are dozens of people out there right now going through what I went through. Companies being destroyed, lives being ruined, innovation being stolen. They need someone who understands how the system works and isn't afraid to fight it. Graham thought about that. About spending the next years helping people who couldn't help themselves. About using everything he'd learned, both in his years as a lawyer and his years as a janitor, to make sure justice wasn't just for people who could afford it. Yes, he said. I'll do it. Lena's smile widened. Good, because I already started setting it up. They stood together watching the water, and Graham felt the last pieces of his old life falling away. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was standing in the open, ready to fight, with people he trusted beside him. Tomorrow, they'd go back to court for the formal dismissal. Tomorrow, the charges would be officially dropped, and Lena would be free. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin. But tonight, they'd won. And for Graham Keaton, that was enough. The morning of the dismissal hearing arrived with crystalline clarity. One of those November days when the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. Graham stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Lena's guest room, wearing a suit that Lena had insisted on buying him the day before. It fit perfectly, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, the kind of suit a successful lawyer wore, not a janitor pretending to be something he wasn't. He looked at his reflection and barely recognized the man staring back. 2 weeks ago, he'd been invisible. Now his face had been on every news channel, his story dissected by legal analysts and social media commentators. The narrative had solidified. Disgraced lawyer finds redemption defending innocent billionaire against corporate conspiracy. It was tidy, dramatic, the kind of story people wanted to believe. What they didn't see was the cost. The sleepless nights, the constant fear that he'd fail, the weight of knowing that if he'd been wrong, Lena would have gone to prison. But he hadn't been wrong, and somehow, impossibly, they'd won. Dad? Tessa's voice came from the doorway. You ready? Graham turned to find his daughter watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe? Or relief? Or something more complicated than either. As ready as I'll ever be, he said. You look good. Like yourself again. I'm not sure I know who that is anymore. Tessa stepped into the room. You're the guy who stood up in a federal courtroom and fought for someone who needed you. You're the guy who wouldn't back down even when they threatened me. You're my dad, and you're finally acting like it again." Graham felt his throat tighten. "Tessa, I'm sorry. For all the years I was absent. For making you watch me disappear into—" "Stop." She held up a hand. "You don't get to apologize your way out of this. You get to show me, going forward, that you meant what you said about being done hiding. That's how you make it right. Fair enough?" She smiled then, genuine and warm. "Come on. Lena's downstairs freaking out about being late, even though we have 90 minutes and it's a 20-minute drive." They found Lena in the kitchen, dressed in a navy suit that somehow managed to look both powerful and understated, pacing while talking on her phone. When she saw them, she ended the call. "That was my board," she said. "They want to schedule a meeting to discuss the company's direction post-trial. Apparently half of them want to throw me a parade, and the other half want to quietly resign before the media attention gets worse." "Let them resign," Graham said. "You don't need people who doubted you." "That's what I told them." Lena grabbed her briefcase. "Ready to make this official?" The drive into Manhattan was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Agent Monroe had called that morning to confirm that Victor Reeves was being extradited to the United States. He'd be arraigned on conspiracy charges within the week, facing decades in federal prison. His network had collapsed, shell companies dissolved, assets frozen, operatives cooperating with investigators. The empire he'd built through intimidation and theft was gone. But something still bothered Graham about it all. It felt too clean, too complete. Men like Reeves didn't build operations that sophisticated without contingency plans. The fact that he'd run to Zurich suggested he'd known what was coming. The fact that he'd fought the Swiss police suggested he'd been desperate. Or maybe Graham was just so used to looking for shadows that he couldn't accept the light. The courthouse steps were packed with press and supporters. Someone had organized a demonstration, people holding signs that read "Justice for Innovation" and "Stop Corporate Theft." Graham spotted faces he recognized from the gallery during trial, people who'd followed the case and decided Lena represented something worth fighting for. Inside, courtroom 18B was standing room only, every seat filled, people lining the walls, the energy electric with anticipation. Graham led Lena to the defense table, and for the first time in 2 weeks, he felt completely calm. This was a formality. The real fight was over. Dale Courtman was already at the prosecution table, looking like a man who desperately wanted to be anywhere else. He nodded at Graham, not friendly, but respectful. An acknowledgement that they'd both been caught in something bigger than either of them. "All rise." Judge Fisk entered, and Graham saw something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Satisfaction. She'd presided over a trial that had exposed a massive conspiracy, and she knew it. "Please be seated." Judge Fisk settled behind the bench and looked directly at Courtman. "Mr. Courtman, I understand the government has a motion?" Courtman stood. "Yes, Your Honor. In light of evidence that has come to light regarding the origins of this prosecution and after consultation with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the government moves to dismiss all charges against Lena Hartwell with prejudice." "Mr. Keaton, does the defense have any objection to this motion?" Graham stood. "No objection, Your Honor. The defense welcomes the government's decision to correct this injustice." Judge Fisk nodded slowly. "The court has reviewed the evidence presented during trial, as well as the sworn statements provided by federal investigators. It's clear that Ms. Hartwell was the victim of a coordinated conspiracy designed to steal her intellectual property and destroy her reputation. The charges brought against her were manufactured through witness intimidation, falsified evidence, and systematic corruption." She paused, letting her words settle over the courtroom. It's not often this court has the opportunity to see justice truly served, but today is one of those rare occasions. Judge Fisk looked at Lena. "Ms. Hartwell, on behalf of this court and the federal justice system, I apologize for what you've been subjected to. The charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You're free to go." The gavel came down. For a moment, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted. Applause, cheers, people on their feet. Graham turned to find Lena with tears streaming down her face, her hand over her mouth, her whole body shaking. "It's over," he said. "It's really over." She nodded, unable to speak. Then she pulled him into a hug that was fierce, and desperate and full of everything they'd been through together. When they finally pulled apart, Tessa was there, wrapping her arms around both of them. Marin appeared next, crying and laughing at the same time. Even Agent Monroe was smiling from her position near the door. Judge Fisk let it continue for a full minute before banging her gavel for order. When the room finally quieted, she had one more thing to say. Mr. Keaton, I don't often comment on the performance of counsel in my courtroom, but I want to acknowledge what you did here. You took a case no one else would touch. You fought against overwhelming odds, and you never stopped believing in your client's innocence. That's what the practice of law is supposed to be. Whatever path you take from here, you should be proud. Graham felt his throat close up. Thank you, Your Honor. Court is adjourned. They made their way through the crowd, Graham keeping close to Lena as reporters shouted questions. Outside, the demonstrators had grown. Now hundreds of people, all cheering as Lena emerged. She paused at the top of the courthouse steps, and Graham saw her making a decision. I want to say something, she told him. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. She turned to face the crowd, and the noise gradually died down. My name is Lena Hartwell, and today I'm free. Her voice carried across the plaza, amplified by the microphones reporters thrust forward. But I'm not the only victim of the conspiracy we exposed. Over the past 2 weeks, the FBI has identified 14 other companies that were targeted by Victor Reeves and his network. 14 innovators who lost everything because they couldn't fight back. The crowd was silent now, listening. I was lucky. I had resources. I had stubbornness. And I had Graham Keaton, a lawyer who remembered what justice actually means. But most people don't have those things. Most people get crushed by the system and nobody ever hears their story. Lena's voice strengthened. That changes today. I'm announcing the creation of the Justice Initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing legal support, investigation resources, and public advocacy for individuals and small companies facing corporate intimidation. We're going to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. The crowd erupted again. Lena continued, speaking over the noise. And I'm not doing this alone. Graham Keaton will be leading the initiative as its executive director, bringing his expertise and his commitment to making sure justice isn't just for people who can afford it. Because that's what this whole fight has been about. The idea that right matters more than money, that truth matters more than power, and that one person standing up can actually make a difference. She turned to Graham. Thank you for everything. The crowd pressed forward, people wanting to shake their hands, share their own stories, express support. It took 30 minutes to make it to the car, and by the time they did, Graham felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. They drove back to Greenwich in convoy. Lena's security, FBI escort, Tessa following in her own car. At the estate, staff had prepared a celebration lunch, but Graham found himself drawn outside to the deck, needing air and quiet. He stood at the railing, watching sailboats move across the Sound, thinking about how completely his life had changed. 2 weeks ago, he'd been nobody. Now he was about to run a foundation with real resources and real impact. The weight of that responsibility was already settling on his shoulders. You're allowed to enjoy this, you know. Lena had appeared beside him, 2 glasses of champagne in her hands. She offered him one. I'm not much of a celebration guy, Graham said. I noticed. But Graham, we won. Not just the case, we exposed a conspiracy, protected future victims, and maybe actually changed something. You're allowed to feel good about that. Graham took the glass but didn't drink. I keep thinking about all the people Reeves destroyed before we stopped him. The companies that went bankrupt, the lives that were ruined. We saved you, but we were too late for them. Which is exactly why the Justice Initiative matters. We can't change the past, but we can prevent it from happening again. Lena touched his arm. Stop doing this. Stop finding reasons to feel guilty about success. 15 years is a hard habit to break. Then start breaking it. Because in about 2 hours, we have a planning meeting with the lawyers who are helping us set up the foundation. In 2 days, we're meeting with the first 3 clients who've already reached out asking for help. And in 2 weeks, we're holding a press conference to officially launch the initiative. You don't have time to wallow. Graham finally smiled. You're very bossy for someone who just got out of a criminal trial. I prefer decisive. Lena smiled back. Come inside. People want to toast you, and it's rude to hide. They went back in together. The house was full. Tessa and Marin, Agent Monroe and some of her team, Lena's executive staff, even a few reporters who'd been invited for an exclusive interview. Graham moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations that still felt strange, trying to reconcile this version of himself with the man who'd pushed a maintenance cart 2 weeks ago. Tessa found him by the windows. "So you're really doing this? Running a foundation? Being a lawyer again? All of it?" "Apparently." "Good. Because I want in." Graham looked at his daughter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to work for the Justice Initiative. My forensic accounting skills were pretty useful during the trial, right? Imagine what I could do with actual resources and a mandate to investigate corporate corruption." Tessa's eyes were bright with excitement. "Dad, this could be huge. We could actually help people." "We? You didn't think I'd let you do this alone, did you? You're finally doing something that matters. I want to be part of it." Graham felt something warm spreading through his chest, pride in his daughter, gratitude that she wanted to work beside him, hope that maybe they could finally build the relationship he'd abandoned years ago. "Okay," he said, "you're in, but I'm still your boss, which means you have to listen when I tell you something's too dangerous." "We'll see about that." Tessa grinned and hugged him. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I know I don't say it enough, but I am." "I'm proud of you too." The afternoon drifted into evening. People gradually left until it was just Graham, Lena, and Tessa sitting on the deck with the remains of dinner and several empty wine bottles. The sun had set, leaving the sky purple and gold, and lights were beginning to appear across the water. "Can I ask you something?" Tessa said, looking at her father. "What was it like, standing up in that courtroom after 15 years? Graham considered the question. Terrifying. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to sit down, stay quiet, stay invisible. But then I looked at Lena sitting there alone, and I thought about all the times I'd walked away from fights because it was easier. And I realized I was done being that person. When did you know you could win? I didn't. Not until the very end. Graham looked at Lena, but I knew I had to try because she deserved someone who wouldn't quit. Lena met his eyes. I had someone who wouldn't quit. That made all the difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each processing everything that had happened. Finally, Tessa stood and stretched. I'm going to head home. Leave you two to your victory basking. She kissed her father's cheek. See you at the office Monday. And yes, I'm assuming we have an office. We will by Monday, Lena assured her. After Tessa left, Graham and Lena remained on the deck. The temperature had dropped, but neither of them moved to go inside. There was something unfinished between them, something that had been building since the trial started, but neither had acknowledged. What happens now? Graham asked quietly. Between us, I mean. Lena was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. 2 weeks ago, you were my lawyer and a janitor I'd never met. Now you're my partner in the initiative, and you're someone I trust more than almost anyone. That's a lot of change very quickly. It is. But Graham, I need you to know something. What happened during the trial, the way you fought for me, the way you never gave up, that wasn't just professional, at least not for me. She turned to face him. I know this is complicated. I know we have work to do together and that mixing personal and professional is usually a disaster, but I also know that what we went through created something real, something I'm not ready to walk away from. Graham felt his heart racing. I'm not good at this. At relationships, at being present, at any of it. I destroyed my marriage by being absent even when I was there. I disappointed my daughter for years because I couldn't get past my own failures. And Lena, you deserve someone who has their life together, not someone who's still figuring out who they are. Maybe I don't want someone who has it all figured out. Maybe I want someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and fight to get it back. Someone who understands that success isn't about never falling down. It's about getting up anyway. Lena reached for his hand. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm just asking if you feel this too. Graham looked at their joined hands, then at her face, strong and vulnerable at the same time, open in a way she probably wasn't with many people. He thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea, all the ways it could complicate everything they were trying to build. Then he thought about the moment in the courtroom when he'd first stood up for her. the moment he'd decided to stop hiding. "Yeah," he said. "I feel it too." She smiled, and Graham saw relief in her expression. "So what do we do about it?" "We take it slow. We keep the initiative as our priority. We make sure Tessa's comfortable with whatever this becomes, and we figure it out as we go." "I can live with that." They stayed on the deck until the cold drove them inside. Lena showed Graham to a different guest room, one that wasn't quite as far from her own, and said goodnight with a kiss that was gentle and tentative and full of possibility. Graham lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how completely his world had shifted. In 2 weeks, he'd gone from invisible to unavoidable, from hiding to fighting, from alone to surrounded by people who cared whether he succeeded or failed. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next morning, they started building the Justice Initiative in earnest. Lena had rented office space in Lower Manhattan, a full floor with views of the harbor and enough room for a staff of 20. Graham spent the day moving boxes, setting up conference rooms, and interviewing the lawyers and investigators Lena had already been recruiting. By the end of the week, they had a team. Tessa handling financial investigations, Marin managing operations, 6 lawyers specializing in corporate litigation, 3 private investigators with backgrounds in federal law enforcement, and a public relations director who understood how to shape narratives. It was more resources than Graham had dreamed possible. The first 3 clients came on Monday: a small biotech company being sued by a pharmaceutical giant, an independent software developer facing patent trolling, and a whistleblower who'd been blacklisted for exposing fraud. Graham interviewed each one personally, taking detailed notes, feeling the old instincts of case analysis coming back stronger than ever. "We can help all 3, he told Lena that evening. "The biotech has a strong defense if we can prove the pharmaceutical company stole their research. The software developer needs protection from frivolous litigation. We can file for sanctions and maybe get the case dismissed. And the whistleblower needs public advocacy as much as legal help. If we can get their story out there, it becomes much harder for the industry to keep blacklisting them." "So we take all 3 cases?" "We take all 3 cases." Lena grinned. "This is going to be amazing." The press conference 2 weeks later was held at the Foundation offices with major media outlets in attendance. Graham stood beside Lena as she announced the initiative's mission, outlined their resources, and introduced the team. When she called him forward to speak, Graham felt the familiar flutter of stage fright, but this time he pushed through it. "3 weeks ago, I was working as a janitor in a federal courthouse," he began. "I'd spent 15 years invisible because I'd been convinced that fighting the system was pointless, that people like me, people without money or power or connections, couldn't make a difference." He looked out at the reporters, the cameras, the faces watching him. "I was wrong. One person can make a difference, but it's a lot easier when you're not alone. The Justice Initiative exists to make sure nobody has to fight corporate intimidation by themselves. We're going to provide the resources, expertise, and support that victims of corporate abuse need to stand up and say no more." Graham outlined their approach: aggressive litigation, thorough investigation, public advocacy, and a commitment to taking cases regardless of a client's ability to pay. He announced they were accepting applications from anyone who believed they'd been targeted by corporate intimidation. "We can't help everyone, he concluded, "but we're going to help as many as we can, because that's what justice actually means, not just for the wealthy, not just for the powerful, but for everyone." The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, they'd received over 300 applications for help. Graham and his team worked 12-hour days reviewing cases, identifying the ones where they could make the biggest impact, building a pipeline of clients who desperately needed what they offered. A month after the trial ended, Victor Reeves was arraigned in federal court. Graham attended with Lena, watching from the gallery as the man who'd orchestrated the conspiracy stood before a judge in an orange jumpsuit, looking diminished and ordinary without his expensive suits and network of operatives. "How do you plead?" the judge asked. Reeves's lawyer entered a plea of not guilty, but everyone in the courtroom knew how this would end. The evidence was overwhelming: testimony from dozens of cooperating witnesses, financial records proving the conspiracy, audio recordings of threats and intimidation. Reeves was going to prison for a very long time. As they left the courthouse, Graham felt Lena's hand slip into his. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. They'd done it. They'd taken down a predator who'd hurt countless people, and now they were making sure it didn't happen again. That evening, Graham had dinner with Tessa at a small Italian restaurant near her apartment. It was the first time in weeks they'd had a chance to just be father and daughter, without case strategy or foundation planning dominating the conversation. "You look happy," Tessa observed. "Like, actually happy, not just going through the motions happy." "I am happy," Graham admitted. "It's strange. I'd forgotten what this felt like." "Dad, can I ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Okay. Are you and Lena together? Like, actually together?" Graham set down his fork. "We're figuring it out, taking it slow, but yeah, there's something there." "Good. She's good for you, makes you stop overthinking everything and actually live." Tessa smiled. "Plus, she's pretty great. I approve." "I'm glad I have your blessing." "You're lucky I'm generous." Tessa's smile faded slightly. "But Dad, seriously, don't screw this up. You've got a second chance at basically everything. Your career, your relationship with me, your personal life. Don't fall back into old patterns." "I won't. I promise." "Make sure you don't, because I'm not watching you disappear again. If you start pulling away, I'm calling you on it." "Deal." They finished dinner and walked through the city, and Graham felt something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, because happiness was too fragile, too dependent on circumstances, but contentment, the sense that he was where he should be, doing what he should be doing. 3 months after the trial, the Justice Initiative had taken on 15 cases and won their first major victory, getting a lawsuit against their biotech client dismissed with prejudice and forcing the pharmaceutical giant to pay sanctions. The story made national news, with headlines praising the foundation's work and Graham's leadership. 6 months later, they'd expanded to a staff of 35 and opened a second office in San Francisco. Tessa had been promoted to chief investigator, and her forensic accounting work had become crucial to multiple cases. Marin had proven to be an exceptional operations manager, keeping the entire organization running smoothly even as it grew rapidly, and Graham had finally stopped looking over his shoulder, waiting for everything to fall apart. A year after the trial, Lena invited Graham to her estate for a private dinner. They'd been officially together for 8 months, though they'd kept it mostly out of the press. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully, both of them conscious of their history and cautious about moving too fast. But tonight felt different, special. They ate on the deck overlooking the Sound, the same place they'd sat so many times during the trial and its aftermath. The weather was perfect. Early autumn, the air crisp and clear, leaves just beginning to turn. "I have something for you," Lena said after dinner. She pulled out a folder and set it on the table. Graham opened it and found architectural plans. "What is this?" "The Justice Initiative's permanent headquarters. I bought a building in Tribeca, 5 floors. Enough space to triple our current staff, with conference facilities and a research library. It's ours, completely funded by my foundation. No rent, no overhead, just pure mission work." Graham stared at the plans, feeling overwhelmed. "Lena, this is necessary." "Graham, we've helped 42 clients in the past year. We've won 31 cases, forced settlements in 8 more, and we're still fighting on 3. But we're turning away hundreds of people who need help because we don't have capacity. This building gives us room to grow into the organization we need to be. It must have cost. Don't worry about what it cost. Worry about what we can do with it." Lena reached across the table and took his hand. "Graham, a year ago you stood up in a courtroom and changed my life. Now we're changing other people's lives. I want to make sure we can keep doing that for as long as there are people who need it." Graham looked at the plans, then at Lena, and felt something clicking into place. This wasn't just about a building. This was about commitment to the work, to each other, to the idea that they could actually make a lasting difference. "Thank you," he said, "for believing this could work, for believing I could do this. I didn't believe you could do it. I knew you could. There's a difference." They sat together as the sun set, making plans for the new building, discussing which cases to prioritize next, talking about the future with an ease that came from truly knowing each other. And Graham realized that somewhere in the past year, He'd stopped being the man who hid from the world. He'd become someone new, someone better, someone who stood up. 2 years after the trial, Graham stood in the lobby of the Justice Initiative's new headquarters on the opening day. The building was beautiful, modern and light-filled, with the Foundation's mission statement carved into the wall in letters 3 feet high. Justice for everyone, not just the powerful. The celebration was packed with clients they'd helped, staff members who'd joined the mission, reporters covering their work, and supporters who believed in what they were building. Tessa stood beside him, looking proud and professional in her role as chief investigator. Lena was across the room, talking to a group of law students who'd asked about internships. Agent Monroe approached with a smile. "Quite an operation you've built here, Mr. Keaton. We've had help. More than that, you've created something that's actually making a difference. The FBI has seen a significant increase in corporate whistleblower reports since you started publicizing your cases. People feel like they have somewhere to turn now. That's the goal. Well, you're achieving it." Monroe glanced around the room. "You know, 2 years ago, I didn't think this would work. I thought Victor Reeves would be too connected, too careful, too powerful. But you proved me wrong. You proved a lot of people wrong. We got lucky." "No, you worked hard, you didn't give up, and you had the courage to stand up when everyone else walked away. That's not luck, Mr. Keaton. That's character." After Monroe left, Graham found himself standing alone for a moment, watching the celebration. He saw Marin laughing with some of the staff, Tessa explaining something technical to a reporter, Lena moving through the crowd with the grace of someone who'd always belonged in rooms like this. And he saw the faces of clients they'd helped, people who'd been days away from bankruptcy, weeks from losing everything, months from giving up entirely. They were here because the Justice Initiative had fought for them, because Graham and his team had refused to let them be crushed by systems designed to favor the powerful. "Pretty amazing, isn't it?" Lena had appeared beside him. 2 years ago, you were pushing a maintenance cart. Now you're changing the world. "We're changing the world. I couldn't have done any of this without you." "I know. But Graham, you need to own this. You built something that matters. You created an organization that's helped hundreds of people and will help thousands more. That's your legacy." Graham thought about that word, legacy. 2 years ago, his legacy would have been invisibility, a cautionary tale about a lawyer who'd let one bad break destroy everything. Now it was this, a foundation, a team, a mission that would outlive all of them. "It's not finished," he said. "There's still so much work to do." "Good, because I'd hate to think we were done fighting." They stood together, watching the celebration, and Graham felt a profound sense of gratitude for the chain of events that had led here. For the moment when he'd stepped forward in that courtroom instead of staying silent, for Lena's refusal to surrender, for Tessa's forgiveness and support, for every person who'd believed that justice was worth fighting for. That evening, after everyone had left, Graham stood alone in his new office on the 5th floor. It was large and comfortable, with windows overlooking the city and walls waiting to be filled with case victories. His name was on the door in brass letters. Graham Keaton, Executive Director. He'd come a long way from that maintenance closet. His phone rang. Unknown number. Graham almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Keaton?" The voice was female, young, frightened. "My name is Sarah Chen. I got your number from your website. I don't know if you can help me, but I'm being sued by a major tech company for something I didn't do, and I'm about to lose everything. Please, I don't know where else to turn." Graham sat down at his desk and pulled over a legal pad. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." As Sarah Chen told her story, familiar in its pattern of corporate intimidation and manufactured legal threats, Graham took notes and felt the old fire kindling in his chest. Another fight, another chance to stand up for someone who needed it. "I'll help you," he said when she finished. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. We'll figure this out together." "Thank you. Oh my God, thank you so much." After she hung up, Graham sat in the quiet of his office, looking out at the lights of Manhattan. Somewhere out there were thousands of people facing the same thing Sarah Chen was facing. People being crushed by systems that favored money and power over truth and justice. The Justice Initiative couldn't help all of them, but they could help some. And helping some was infinitely better than helping none. Graham opened his computer and started a new case file. Sarah Chen ver whoever was trying to destroy her. They'd fight it. They'd win it. And they'd add another victory to the wall, because that's what Graham Keaton did now. He stood up. 3 years after the trial, Lena and Graham stood on a beach in the Caribbean, barefoot in the sand, surrounded by 30 people they loved. Tessa was the maid of honor, crying openly as her father and Lena exchanged vows they'd written themselves. "I promise to stand beside you," Graham said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "To fight alongside you, to never back down from what's right, even when it's hard. You saved my life by giving me a reason to stop hiding. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." "I promise to believe in you," Lena said, tears on her cheeks. "To challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right. To build a life with you that matters, not because we're wealthy or successful, but because we use what we have to help others. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward anyway. Let's keep moving forward together." They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Graham felt a completeness he'd never imagined possible. This was what winning looked like. Not a courtroom victory or a news headline, but this, love and partnership and a shared mission that gave everything meaning. The Justice Initiative continued to grow. By year 5, they had offices in 8 cities and a staff of over 200. They'd helped more than 1,500 clients, won hundreds of cases, and forced systemic changes in how corporations conducted business. Graham had argued before the Supreme Court twice, testifying about the need for stronger protections against corporate intimidation. Victor Reeves died in federal prison 7 years after his conviction, still fighting appeals he would never win. When Graham heard the news, he felt nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet acknowledgement that the threat was finally, completely over. Tessa became one of the youngest chief investigators in any major legal foundation, her work exposing corruption celebrated in legal journals and business publications. She met a software engineer at a conference, fell in love, and gave Graham his first grandchild, a daughter they named Justine, after the principle that had brought the family back together. Marin went to law school and joined the initiative as an attorney, bringing her unique perspective as someone who'd been threatened into silence but found the courage to speak anyway. And Graham kept fighting, every day, new cases, new battles, new people who needed someone to stand up for them. He was older now, graying at the temples, reading glasses perched on his desk. But he was alive in a way he'd never been when he was invisible. 10 years after the trial, Graham gave a speech at Harvard Law School, invited to talk about his journey from disgraced lawyer to founder of one of the most influential legal foundations in the country. "I spent 15 years believing I was done," he told the auditorium full of law students. "That one mistake, one frame job, one moment of bad luck had permanently defined who I was. I made myself invisible because I thought that was safer than being seen." He paused, looking out at all those young faces, full of ambition and hope. "I was wrong. Being invisible isn't safe. It's death. Not physical death, but the death of everything that makes us human. Purpose, connection, the belief that what we do matters." Graham smiled. "You're going to face moments in your career where the easy choice is to stay quiet, to not get involved, to let someone else fight the battle. And I'm here to tell you, don't do that. Stand up, speak up, fight for what's right, even when it's terrifying." After the speech, students lined up to ask questions, to shake his hand, to tell him they'd followed the Justice Initiative's work and been inspired by it. Graham stayed for 2 hours, talking to each one, seeing in their faces the same determination he'd finally found in himself. That night, he and Lena sat in the living room of the Connecticut estate, the same house where they'd weathered the storm together, made plans to change the world, and fallen in love. "No regrets?" Lena asked, curled up beside him on the couch. Graham thought about the question, about the 15 years he'd lost to invisibility, the career he'd abandoned, the life he'd wasted, about the moment in a federal courtroom when he'd stood up and changed everything. "Not anymore," he said. "Everything I went through, the frame job, the years pushing a cart, the fear and hiding, it all led here, to this, to us, to the work we do. So no regrets." "Good," Lena kissed him, "because we're just getting started. I got an email today from a senator who wants to work with us on legislation to protect whistleblowers, and 3 new clients reached out with cases that could set major precedents. Of course they did. You love it. Yeah, Graham admitted, I really do. They sat together in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other completely, watching the lights move across the distant water. Somewhere out there, people were being threatened, intimidated, pushed around by systems that favored the powerful. But now, thanks to the Justice Initiative, they had somewhere to turn, someone who would stand up for them. Graham Keaton had spent 15 years invisible, but he'd spent the last decade making sure nobody else had to be. And that, he thought as he held Lena close and felt the warmth of their life together, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.